Welcome to Sherlock Monthly. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we are going on a biblioventure through the stories of Sherlock Holmes. And today's episode is episode 37, and it's the adventure of Black Peter. And joining me for this episode are two co-hosts. Welcome to Glen Miranker and Max Magee. Welcome, guys.
Hello, thanks, Ed.
Delighted to be here.
This is absolutely great. I'm so happy to have both of you on this show. I'll give a little full introduction in just a moment. And and the general bit for 30 weeks, everybody in 23 and 24, 2023 to 24, we deduced, deciphered, dissected Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes adventures in a kind of conversational annotation. You can see all those episodes on the Rosenbach's YouTube channel. Now we're continuing this biblioventure in a monthly series. Every month, a distinguished Sherlockian or two joins me to discuss one of the stories in the order they were first published. I'm not going to mess with chronology. That'll be a nightmare. We're also continuing the numbering system from Monday. So this is episode 37. If you're watching live right now, I would ask you to please subscribe to the Rosenbach's YouTube channel and to like these videos. That helps us, in the algorithms and get higher up and more viewers in general. You guys watching live, leave comments in the live chat. That always gets preserved too. So anytime you can come back here, that live chat is there for you to see. Have fun. Chat as much as you want. You people who are not new to this know that there's like two shows going on at the same time. It's us talking and you guys talking. I love that. And also, finally, if you would please consider making a donation to the Rosenbach or by becoming a member. You can do this at our website, rosenbach.org. I've also put those links in the live chat. Your support helps us create programs like this and also care for our collections. Sherlock Monthly is also brought to you all by generous support from Lisa Washington, who has supported both the Mondays and the monthly program. But for this show, let me introduce my co-hosts for today. Maximilian Magee is the social chair of the notorious Canary Trainers of Madison, Wisconsin. He leads a group known as the Comrades of the Order and its spin-off Spode section, Captain Basil's Mignonettes. He is a member of Norwegian Explorers of Minnesota, Tourist International SS of Chicago, probably many more. We could be all day giving everybody his connections to Scions. Max's background, education and work, experience in text, and also the background that he's on the beach now, has led to all sorts of weird and Sherlockian projects. He did a reserialization of The Hound of the Baskervilles. He used AI and computer science to dissect and discuss the canon. Max holds a BS in engineering mechanics and astronautics from the University of Wisconsin. He's been a flight design engineer and flight controller at NASA's Johnson Space Center. He is currently manager of software development at a local Madison software company. Max, of course, for you all, he was a co-host on Sherlock Mondays, Hound of the Baskervilles that we did, and also a co-host for Biblioventures, Monsters and Ghosts, A Christmas Carol, which we just finished not that long ago. Welcome back, as always, Max.
Well, thank you so much, Ed, and it's good to see Glenn here. I'm not going to get ahead of the introduction, but you're a couple of my favorite Sherlockians and some of my favorite Sherlockian beard wearers as well.
There you go. So, and I'm glad you decided to grow something for this, Max.
I had to. I got it brindled just for today.
All righty. Glen Miranker, everyone, has been engrossed in the world of Sherlock Holmes nearly his entire life. While a graduate student at MIT, he began collecting and forging contacts and friendships in the Sherlockian bibliosphere. He was invested into the Friends of Irene Adler in 1979, the Speckled Band of Boston in 1981, and the Baker Street Irregulars in 1991 as the origin of tree worship. I love that, Glenn. Book from the Empty House, which the manuscript is at the Rosenbach. So I love that connection. Glenn was invited by Steve Jobs to join Next Computer in 1990, Apple Computer in 96. He was, for most of his tenure at Apple, he ran hardware development, served as Apple's chief technology officer, retired in 2004. In 1976, Glenn began assembling a collection of books, manuscripts, artwork, and letters with a view to telling the story of the creation and publication of the canon. An exhibition of his collection, Sherlock Holmes and 221 Objects, first appeared at the Collier Club in New York City and has traveled to other locations as well. Glen, I am so pleased to have you on, finally, to get you onto one of our Sherlock shows. Thank you.
I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I think these shows are terrific. The Rosenbach is breathtaking. I've been there any number of times.
You
And
have, yeah.
and you know, every time I learn 50 things just walking in the door and chatting with whoever happens to be there, librarians,
Yeah.
curators, visitors. So more than delighted to be participating.
A great book atmosphere for a collector to come visit.
It's
And
a
you
beautiful
also,
city as well. It's in a beautiful historic area in the city. I mean, you got to go to Rosenbach. Everybody put it on your bucket list.
yeah, if you're visiting, definitely come and let me know that you're coming, and maybe I can pop down and see you.
There
So.
may be a Rosenbachanal coming up. I just got a mailing about.
There is a Rosenbach now, our big fundraising dinner that we have once a year. But there's all kinds of programs running at the Rosenbach all the time, and plus our treasures galleries are open. So there's always something to see when you visit. Glenn, you also in your collection is the Black Peter manuscript, and we'll be seeing some images of that today. Um, Talk, I gave a little brief general. You started collecting in 76. Talk to us a little bit about your collection or how you started collecting and how you've continued it.
Well, I mean, the very start is one of my favorite stories, and I had been reintroduced to Sherlock actually as an undergraduate, another tale, a pleasant tale, and that rekindled my very youthful interest in the stories as an almost an adult, and but I was not a collector by any stretch of the imagination. My Sherlock Holmes holdings consisted of the Doubleday complete Sherlock Holmes story. That's it. And I was in grad school, recently married to Kathy, still married to Kathy. And right,
Max is Doubleday.
that's the one. And I was home one Saturday working away on my thesis, no doubt grumbling. Kathy goes out for a walk. She comes back and says, I got you a present to cheer you up. And she hands me a American First Edition of the Casebook of Sherlock Holmes, which I open up and my eyes evidently went wide and I'm staring at it and I look up at her and I said, gee, you don't have to be J.P. Morgan to collect books. It just hadn't occurred to me that this was something that regular people do. At any rate, she had stumbled on a very small antiquarian book fair on her perambulations, 6, 8, 10, 12 dealers tops on card tables and so on and so forth. And I said, oh my God, can we go back? Is it open on a Sunday? Remember, I'm not a collector. I didn't know that book fairs are typically Saturday and Sunday, but the next morning we went over and she brought me over to the table where she had purchased the book, and it was this fellow named Peter Stern, who anybody who collects Sherlock is a very familiar name. He's been a very large figure in detective fiction, antiquarian detective fiction for decades, since the 70s, and Sherlock Holmes in particular.
Is he the one that was always competing with Otto Penzler over
Oh no,
getting?
they're good friends.
Yeah.
They're,
Well,
no,
yes. Oh, and yes, but also they were collecting.
no, absolutely. I mean, they're very good friends, and uh, also at that table was a fellow named Dan Poznansky. So I got introduced that Sunday morning to Peter Stern and Dan Poznansky, and the story goes on. But that was the spark that started my collecting. That book that was handed to me, and that meeting this following Sunday morning. I still have that book. I had a very nice clamshell made for it. It's on the case, and the label though on the clamshell is the world's costliest book. Not the case.
Yeah.
So
Because what it then cost you in finishing
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. I have more interesting. I've over the years I've acquired more interesting copies of the American Casebook, Dust Jacket and Scribed by Doyle and so forth. But this book will never ever not be part of my collection.
Good. It's kind of like Rosebud in Citizen Kane.
Oh, exactly.
That's your Rosebud. Well,
That's
now
my
we know it's not a mystery.
No, that's it.
I would also say that it's super meta because your collection and the book novelization of the collection is now in everybody's collection. So now you're the collector, but you're also the collectee.
Well, my hope, my intent, both putting together the collection and writing the catalog, is I wanted people to be able to visit these books with me. And I hope you find the catalog, for example, at least the tone and the write-ups and so on and so forth. I think I think they're bibliographically well done, but it's very conversational. I wanted it to be like walking, in my library where I am right now, and appreciating these books and appreciating that it's, for me at any rate, it's largely the backstories that are fascinating.
That's what I was going to say, is
Yeah.
you can see those things in other collections or on auction blocks in other catalogs, but the way that you present them is why you've collected it, like what it means to you and what the meaning of this particular item. And every one of the ones in your collection is unique, because of its provenance or its inscribed or the letter that we'll talk about in Black Page.
Or it might be, or it might be simply just it just has a story about how it came
Yeah.
to be.
It's a
And
great read. Like I'm not done with it because it is 221 objects. Every one of them.
This is the cat people didn't catch this is the catalog book for 221
Yeah,
objects.
so if you haven't seen it, I don't know, Glenn, is there one in California going right now, or is it done? You're
no,
running.
actually, right now the collection is in a truck someplace between Minneapolis and San Francisco.
Okay. I knew it was headed to the West Coast. I wasn't sure if there was another
There's no planned public display of this, right? Honestly, the only
get the book.
I would be more than happy to put it up again, but somebody needs to ask. I'm not a good promoter. I put it it was at the Grolio, and Joel Silver attended the exhibition, and he pulls me aside and he says, "This has to come to the Lily." And Tim
Yeah.
Johnson was at the Grolio and says, "This has to come to the Anderson." And so I said, "Fine, I'm delighted." And nobody else has asked.
Wow.
Just
And
no,
you
and I'm offering that as how
yeah.
inept I am at promoting, things. If
Well,
somebody were to ask, I'd say, yeah, absolutely.
this is an invitation to everyone with a venue
There
who
you go.
loves wonderful books. Reach out because Glenn is so magnanimous. You brought the Silver Blaze illustration from your library. It's my favorite. I'd never seen it in person, obviously. And when you look at it up close, it's so much different. There's so much more depth than the woodcut. I've talked about this on a different talk, but it was a transformative experience for me.
Is that the Sherlock and Watson in the train car?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
Smoking
is.
compartment. You can see it on the window. Yeah, I have a
Yes.
big one of that on my wall over here from my exhibition at the Rosenbach. Just a blow up of the picture itself. Yeah,
That's where mine is, right there.
yeah. There you go.
Oh, I'm off the island. Hey, look, congratulations to me. Um, yeah, no, it really made me appreciate the artistry of Paget even more than I already did because the woodcuts can't do justice to what the
Well,
original.
also this, the strand was, well, there's certainly, certainly for a mass publication. They were constrained by the technology. There was certainly technologies for doing extremely high quality reproductions.
Yeah.
Not saying that was not available,
Hmm.
but for a magazine which was a
For
shilling,
monthly. Yeah.
and it was A, a shilling, and B was going to be two, three, four. Well, with a Sherlock Holmes story, it would be 400,000 copies.
Hmm.
They were not the quality of the reproductions is not very good.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And you know, being in presence of the real thing, there's also the emotional addition of being in presence of the real thing. But seeing you know, the depths of colors and shading and the
The highlight,
knowing and
the
right,
white.
the
That's the
white.
thing that stood out to me is there's another like dimension above the two-dimensional frame is that it's expressed in the deep dark tone, but also that I don't know if it's pastel, but that sort of like gesso almost looking white
It's squash.
wash, whitewash,
Gouache.
wash.
Opaque, basically opaque watercolors.
Yeah.
There's pigment in it so that it's opaque, but it's, you know, watercolors, but
And that's what
opaque.
you really miss with the woodcuts. You can't go brighter than the page.
So, but yes, although I have to say my favorite pageant, well, my favorite pageant is I don't know which it is.
It's so hard. It really
Well,
is like picking your
no,
children.
up to a few months ago, I absolutely would have said is the pageant I have from the Priory School.
Mm.
Which is Holmes leaning over, examining the bicycle tire with a
Oh, yeah.
match so he can
Yeah.
illuminate the patch. And it's very, very atmospheric. And how I recently acquired another Paget,
Mhm.
and that is Holmes and Moriarty tussling over Reichenbach. And so
That, yeah, that's one of my favorite pageants.
I'm now a little torn. But if you asked me last spring, without hesitation, it would have been the Priory School pageant.
Interesting. Now, in that one, is that the one with like all the ferns along the path and they're right on the
Yes.
cliff? I didn't even know that that was something that was in a collectible version. When you say you acquired it, did you do
It
that?
was part of the Swanco auction what was it, past June,
Wow.
July, a handful
Okay.
of months ago.
You taking
And
off your 221 objects to put that one on.
well, yeah, take something else out and put that one in.
Yeah.
But uh, uh, that was a very, you know, quite recent acquisition.
Well, we will look at a couple of the pageant illustrations later for this story, and one of the things we'll address is, and I think Doyle too, wasn't that particularly pleased with the pageant illustrations for Black Peter, at least the scenes that perhaps Paget chose to illustrate. But we can get into that later. The Black Peter manuscript, Glenn, you have a few manuscripts. How many do you have?
Uh, I'm gonna have to. You'll indulge me. I don't know. I always have to count them
Several.
out. I just have to count them out.
Several.
Several.
You know,
And
same
then,
Well,
with me, Ed. I
I
couldn't
have
tell you
Black
without really
Peter.
looking.
I have the Greek Interpreter. I
but you
have
have
Black
these three
Peter.
stories in a row, which I think is fabulous. That we've just done in chronological publication order.
Yes.
What is it? Norwood's
Priory
Priory School,
Priory School. Greek Interpreter.
Solitary Cyclist.
Solitary Cyclist. And Black Peter.
Yeah. So you have those in four in a row then. Wow.
Yeah, and that's in a way that's a coincidence.
Yeah.
Well, the Priory School, um, uh, I got many years ago. There was a tremendous collector, Marv Epstein, and you know, he started his day job. He was a mathematician at Bell Labs, and he became interested in detective fiction, but in particular Sherlock Holmes, I'm guessing, maybe late 50s, 60s. And he put together a tremendous collection, and he discovered many things which at the time were not known. You know, like for example, what distinguished the true first edition, first printing of the Adventures of Sherlock, the American Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. You know, a small type of omission on page 65 of the book. The word if is left out, and the assumption is that the copy that doesn't have if is the true first. But any number of things, first magazine appearances and so forth. And Marv, towards the end of his life, was losing his sight. I think something not exotic, like macular degeneration. And he decided that he wanted to spend the time he had left when he wanted to travel. And so he disposed of his collection, well before his passing. And I was able to acquire all the Sherlock except the art. I couldn't afford his whole collection. In fact, I couldn't afford anything. I committed one of the cardinal sins of book collecting. I borrowed the money to buy his collection.
That's how Dr. Rosenbeck used to work. So,
and
but of course it was business because he could borrow and then he was going to sell them. You were
I was going to say that was business,
which is different. Borrowing to collect is different.
I was a graduate student, and this was a sum of money which I couldn't even imagine, how long it would take me to have it. But at any rate, I was Peter Stern, who was helping Marv dispose of, was able to talk Marv into breaking it into three. He was firmly committed to selling the whole thing en masse, and Peter Stern talked me into breaking it into three pieces: the Sherlock, the artwork, and the general detective fiction. And I was able to manage the Sherlock part.
Wow.
Very long-winded. The Priory School was one of the things. And that's how the Priory School came into my collection.
And that's your first manuscript then that you had?
That's my first man. And I thought, honestly, until relatively recently, I thought that would be it. I didn't think the opportunity or means would, line up.
How did the Black Peter come your way then?
Oh, well, the Black Peter came my way. Every other manuscript, there's something about the manuscript that actually spoke to me. Believe it or not, it was the letter of conveyance to
Collier?
To Collier's, to Peter Collier's. That
I'm gonna share the image of that now.
Yeah. And I said, geez, this was a gift. This was a gift to a publisher who managed to talk, or I think bribe Conan Doyle, back into writing these stories. Of course, financial needs certainly helped. But what really sold me, what really convinced me, that what drove me to wanting to add this to my collection, in fact, was this letter. I know it sounds sort of inappropriate, but the manuscript itself is it has relatively few corrections, and the text is quite close, extremely close to both the UK and the US published editions. So it's not like there are astounding discoveries to be made about either the story or Conan Doyle's methods of work in this particular manuscript. However, the letter is really something. And the letter proposes a little bit of a conundrum. Which Collier was he writing to, the elder or the son?
It says Mr. People might misinterpret that writing there as like a W, but it's Mr. and he's that little line there.
It's definitely Mr. You can see that if you have a large number of Conan Doyle's handwriting, Mr. and Mrs. are almost impossible to distinguish, but they all look like that funky looking W. Similarly, in when he dates letters with 18XXX, he has this kind of swooping slash followed by the 8. It doesn't look like anything like a 1. He has a handful of these things in his handwriting. Personally, I think it's the elder. And the reason I think it's the elder is the son, who was certainly
the elder founded Collier's Publishing, and then his son.
Well, the other was very involved commercially. Certainly.
And his son ran the magazine pretty much, didn't he?
Yes, but I think that it strikes me that the formality of Mr. as to another greeting which he uses with it would be my dear Collier. And his son was a peer, age and so on and so forth. So this is a supposition. There's no bread and butter letter of conveyance or something which says exactly what would happen, at least that I know about. But my supposition is that the formality indicates that it was to the father.
Mhm.
But
Now, this wasn't a gift, a Christmas gift, as it sort of would imply with my best Christmas wishes. This was, I'm delivering on time this manuscript, which you've already paid me a lot of money to do, right?
a great deal of money. I don't remember the numbers, but I do remember that the numbers were so high that Strand initially declined to bid. I
And
don't
that's how it
think
ended up in
I do
Collier's,
recall.
right?
That's right. That's why the Colliers is the true first appearances.
I think
Um,
your book actually, and so I'm referring to the manuscript series from the BSI that you edited,
hmm,
contributed to. Yeah, everybody loves it too, by
The
the way.
older book.
It's got the Collier's illustration on the cover, which is I think one of the greatest Collier's illustration. I looked back before I had even, known that I was going to be on this podcast. There were two illustrations that I highlighted that I couldn't tell you which one's my favorite. One is this one because it also to me looks like the Maryland flag. This is what appeared on the Collier's cover for Black Peter, and then there's one for the empty house where he's got the Norwegian Explorer. It's the Norwegian Explorer's logo now, and it's just
yes.
such a beautiful mountain scene. Do you own that one?
No, I don't. I
You can't
don't.
win them all.
No, it's wh- wh- there's I'm trying making sure I'm not making a mistake. I think the only hair manuscript Paget that I have is for the Priory School.
Oh, that's nice. I mean,
Uh,
that's a nice one because it's one of your favorites too.
yes. Um,
I'm gonna move to the. I'm gonna move. Here's the first page of this. Um, again, Doyle's immaculate handwriting, which is always,
It is.
how did
well,
this?
and it's not only immaculate, but it doesn't change over the years.
Oh, yeah.
Based on handwriting, you can't tell something from 1890 from something from 1928.
Yeah, I've seen, manuscripts that do that over time. We have some in our collections at the Rosenbach where like Dickens, you look at his manuscript from Pickwick Papers, looks nothing like his later manuscripts. It's like somebody else wrote this as he went on over time.
Yes,
His handwriting changed.
but not so with Doyle.
The This one we're lucky that it survives because he gave it to them as a Christmas gift because, well, who knows what could have happened to it, but also this one isn't bound. Doyle had preserved most of this period. He took about 10 of them and he had them all bound in vellum. This is one
Yes.
of the ones that wasn't, and it wasn't, I'm assuming, because he gave it away and didn't have it to have bound.
Yeah, I think it's a great, there's at least one letter and it's in the exhibition. Of course it's to my dear sir and no envelope, so I can't know who it was written to. And it's sort of a chit-chatty letter about to some house guest. And Doyle remarks that he liked this guest's suggestion about taking the manuscripts and sending them out to get bound. He said, I plan to send them out to Spiels to have them all bound in vellum and,
Yeah,
and in their tidy white coats. And these are Doyle's words, in hopes of the capricious American millionaire who might come by.
yeah.
The implication being that he was all set to sell the damn things, but
And none of them
but
sold for that much. Some of them he even just donated to Red Cross,
oh, many of them. Yeah.
He was just a century too early because there was a millionaire who was willing to pony up for some of these things eventually. But $1 million
Eventually.
isn't what it used to be.
Oh, I don't know. Well, that's certainly true. It was sizable sum in even in 1920.
Hmm.
This one has at the top of it in this top corner, it says 3 copies, 8,400 were, and this is, I think, not likely Doyle's writing. This is the typist. We even know the typist on this one.
Wow.
And I think it is in Deadly Harpoon because Randall Stock, who wrote the essay on this, and he writes about in his Best of Sherlock site is just fabulous on this
He's
too.
amazing, and I give him full credit. His Best of Sherlock site is the reason I actually became a Sherlockian. Without his aids, I would have probably still been wandering in the wilderness.
His scholarship and his attention to detail, and he's a great writer.
Hmm.
Are He has peers, but nobody's better.
Hmm.
A couple of
Particularly at what he does. His
no,
attention,
no, what he does, he has no peer.
yeah,
No, he's unique.
his
But
attention to
at
detail
least,
rivals Phil Burgum, I would say. And Phil Burgum,
yeah,
I've
yeah,
never known anyone like him. He
yeah,
annotated the manuscript in your book.
yes. The it's a roughly it was at the time of the return stories when Conan Doyle modified his methods of work and would send the manuscripts out for typing. And the only reference I have is Randall's. He would have 3 copies typed.
Hmm.
One at least in the case of the return, one for the Strand, one for Collier's, and I guess one for himself or something. I don't remember, or if Rand had turned up where the third one went.
The
But
empty
three cop
house. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, no, go ahead. But three
Oh,
copies was the scheme.
yeah, the empty house that we have, it also says on that at the Rosenbach, it says 3 copies, and then it says Morley Hotel, and that's because that's where apparently the typist was meeting him to hand over the
Hmm.
3 copies. So,
I have a question for you experts. So I have heard these called holograph manuscripts or holographs or manuscripts. Is there a difference between the term manuscript and holograph?
Sure, it could be typed.
Wouldn't that be a typescript
Well,
manuscript?
it could be a manuscript or a typescript, just like with these, it's a holograph or a holograph manuscript. It's either Ed, you're the super pro on this, but my understanding is that manuscript is a slightly generic term,
Okay.
and holograph or type is
holograph
added
means by
to it
hand, doesn't it?
and can be
Yeah,
more specific if it's by hand or if it's typescript.
yeah. So,
And they're kind of used correctly interchangeably. That is,
Hmm.
if it's a handwritten manuscript, it'll be interchangeably called a manuscript or a holograph manuscript.
Got it. Thank you.
someone can correct this in the chat too,
How
which,
how
Yes,
dare
no
they
doubt.
correct the experts?
which will
No,
happen.
no, 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 no,
I
no.
kid.
Well, you
I'm
think that
self-taught.
manu means by hand, so that's
Right.
what it should be. But I think, Glenn, you're right, that's become a more generic term. So then
I
people
see.
differentiate between what kind of manuscript it
And
is.
the holograph doesn't refer to the fact that it's in 3D and you can see
No.
their face. It's
No.
holograph meaning like all done as in a whole thing by hand.
All right, now I'm gonna have to look it up.
Now you're gonna have to. Now you're gonna. I actually I don't know if that's Greek or Latin, but you're gonna have to look up the thing for holo.
So while we're doing that, or while you're doing that, Ed, I don't even know how to look that up.
Holograph is handwritten. That is what it means.
Okay,
Yes.
and what does
I don't know
manuscript
if the
come
what the
from?
hollow comes from. I didn't go
Okay.
that deep, but it definitely that's what a holograph is. It's a handwritten manuscript. That's what I thought it was. Now I'm starting to doubt everything. But uh yeah, sometimes they could be typescripts. And I don't know. Like, Glenn, maybe you can answer this question before we hit the story because we're ready to do it. Are there typescripts that have existed? Or did they?
I don't know of one.
Yeah, I
I've
don't
never
know of any.
seen one referenced. I've never seen one. And the only part of this that surprises me is that given that we believe that Conan Doyle held on to or could or would or held on to one of the three, that none ever showed up in any of these,
Yeah.
late developing caches of stuff.
Right. The Doyle children had a ton
like
of
the
other.
like the and no, I'm not aware of it.
That even Doyle didn't seem to save it, at least to the point where his heirs then thought they should continue to save them. So, yeah.
Before we move on from talking about the process to the story, Lauren Ann, I noted in the
Thank you.
chat.
I was just going to get to that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, please go ahead, Ed.
Is it Lauren asked a question of did he, because we see these beautiful usually when you see a holograph written this well, it's a fair copy, but
Yep.
that's not the case with Doyle. Doyle sat down, and we have this example from not just Sherlock stories, but other stories right through. He sat down and wrote them out neatly out of his head, and then would go back and make adjustments in them, corrections, add some things, take some things out. But shockingly, his manuscripts are his fair copy manuscripts.
Well, there's a letter in the British Library someplace about a house guest who remarks about seeing Conan Doyle in his office writing out these stories without consulting notes, without his in the letter the remark is without correction, and he further remarks in the middle of chaos, children running around, dogs running around. He just wrote it out.
Yeah, that was his process. His process enabled
The
him
other,
to do it that way.
the other thing which is readily deducible from the manuscripts themselves is changes or alterations that occurred to him while he was writing it out, he made in ink. So, for example, in The Solitary Cyclist, I don't remember Roaring Jack Woodley's original name,
Hmm.
but the first two times it appears in whatever the original name was, and it's original because it's, in line and so on and so forth. First two times they're crossed out
Yeah,
and Woodley is written
yeah,
in ink. And thereafter, the name in the story, the name Woodley appears. Just an example. Evidently, he would go back through the manuscript and would make adjustments and corrections, and those seem to be almost invariably in pencil.
yeah. I think there is at least one. No, there's I think two manuscripts I know of where he's left a blank because
Hmm.
he hasn't come up with a name yet, and
Yep.
then later has added a name.
In pencil a lot of times, and you'll know it. Yeah,
Well,
the
I'll leave a small teaser as opposed to a spoiler with you guys.
ooh,
I'm in early stages of putting together facsimile of the sign of four. One of the names is not the name we know and love.
I
Mm.
know this one. It was Johnny Large at first. Now he's Jonathan Small, adjusted for inflation.
No, no, that's not it.
Nope. Oh, that was close.
Interesting. All righty.
But I'm not spilling the beans.
All right. Well, I love that tease.
That was
So,
nice.
good. All
But I
right.
changed the subject. I wandered off the subject and I
It's all
apologize.
right.
My my
Max and
last
I are drinking all this rum, so
I know I'm loving this. This is going to be a 6 hour episode,
this is
and I'm
rum
okay with
today,
that.
people.
No,
I've released the Kraken in here for this whole episode.
there you go. My current rum of choice is the Jonah's Curse, and it's a whaling
Oh, I
uh,
love that.
black spiced rum. So
But I have lime, so I can
keep those teeth, Ed.
keep the
I was
scurvy.
going to say I would have guessed your teeth look nice and tight in their gums. So
At my
either
last
either either citrus or sauerkraut, obviously in your diet.
I love sauerkraut, let me tell you.
At my last Sherlock Holmes Notorious Canary Trainers meeting, by the way, that my local scion is named after one of the untold stories that at the beginning of this case. And so that's another really nice connection is this is the case of Wilson, the notorious canary trainer. And we don't know if the canaries were notorious, if he was just really bad at training them, who knows. But at the very beginning, um, we started with who wants to try some grog? Because grog would be the worst possible rum you could give to sailors. It was called a gill, or a half gill was the ration. So you'd get like not a large thimble, it's kind of a shot glass full. Pour that out, put some water in it. A lot of times you didn't
Yeah.
have fresh water.
Water or juice, lime juice.
And
Yeah.
then you'd put some lemon or lime in it again for flavor and scurvy prevention. Once we figured out that scurvy was a lack of vitamin C or whatever we believed the humor method to be about that, who knows. And then finally you'd add, and this is new to me, you'd add something like cinnamon or clove to get rid of the terrible taste of the rum. And so the recipe for rum and water wasn't just rum and water, it was something to flavor it.
Yeah. That's why I'm
Well,
drinking the spiced
my
rum.
understanding is, in large measure, that's how gin came about.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
It's vodka with something to cover the
adding
flavor.
herbals to cover the awful, awful quote neutral spirits, which were not neutral, were horrible.
Yeah.
Well, grog was the sailor's drink, and we'll have that in the story today. But
Mhm.
before we even get to that, Doyle himself, as a young man, was a sailor. He went to the Arctic on the Greenland whaler Hope, it was called. The ship was called Hope. And 20 years old, turned 21 on the voyage, got to come of age in the Arctic, like near the North Pole. What a fabulous story. And he wrote about
Re
it.
Reached his majority, I think is the phrase he
Yeah.
used.
He wrote about it in the and published a piece in the Strand in 1897 this is during the years when he was not writing Sherlock Holmes stories. And let me share this. This was in the Strand magazine, Life on a Greenland Whaler by A. Conan Doyle. And here's a picture of him here in the center. I have a better picture to show this in a minute. And it is about his journey. Here's the Hope down here. Here's the captain, Captain John Gray. Um, and here this whaling harpoon I will come back to a little later because it's pretty much the harpoon in the Strand magazine story that's illustrated there.
Yes and no, but
Oh, the tip is, and we'll
the
talk
tip
about,
is yes,
yeah,
but
well,
that's an explosive
yes, it's
boom.
star poop, yes. So, but the tip is, so the blade part. Anyway, the I'm not going to share all the pictures because then half the pictures that he shared are all like dead animals hung up on the deck, and it's like, oh. So, but you can find this. This was in the Strand. This was also Doyle had kept, and he based his article because he kept
Diary.
he
The
kept a
journal.
Diary.
he kept a diary of it, which he also illustrated himself. Here's a page from it. I got this page from the Best of Sherlock site, and sailing costume. I'm assuming he's drawing himself here, maybe in his sailing costume. Um, it's interesting that he calls it a costume, and but his beautiful drawing up here of Hope. And here's another color one that he has put in that is added to this. This
Well,
was
Ed, there was clearly some of the Doyle illustrative genes
yeah,
in Arthur's
that he
blood as
got
well.
from his father. Yeah. It was published. This was published, this journal, as a dangerous work, Diary of an Arctic Adventurer, a few years ago. So you can actually buy this.
And it's beautiful. That was Dan Stashauer and John Lellenberg,
John Lelleberg published this.
2012. And it's still out there. It's actually very affordable compared to the original cover price. So if you see it, buy it.
Doyle fell overboard 3 times. He wrote about, and was he? I think he was Nick. The captain gave him a nickname, and I can't remember what it is now. Um,
It was Bob because of how he swam.
But here's a better shot of that picture that was in the Strand, and here he is right in the center here. It looks like is it a cigar in his mouth, maybe? Like just sticking straight through there. I don't think it was a pipe.
It may have been something like jerky.
Here he is again, looking like a tough. Like he looks like, and we know he was a big man and all, but just the expression on the face too. He looks like I better look tough around all these sailors because
Glenn, I learned the story
they're
of his
sailors.
recruitment. Can you tell, Ed, do you know the story about how he got
No.
hired? Glenn, please.
Well, the story I remember is that they were assembling the crew for this ship, and one of the positions they were looking for was physician, an onboard physician, and Conan Doyle shows up someplace where they were interviewing, and I don't remember exactly how, but a contretemps arose between Conan Doyle and one of the other candidates for the crew, and Conan Doyle decked him. And the captain says, "You'll do." So,
And,
is that
and
what Max
Yeah,
was that close,
that's
Max?
exactly it. Well,
that
and
guy
what's
showed up
great
with a
is
black eye, and he was like, "This is the greatest doctor we'll ever have on a ship."
they
Right.
ended up
No,
great
no,
friends.
no, no, no inquiries as to his medical
You're
expertise.
right. That's
Just
Not
what we call
even
the ship surgeon,
graduated.
right?
Had not graduated
no.
Edinburgh University yet, and but apparently you didn't need to be a ship doctor.
Do you know what they got him for? You know what they really got him on board for is his boxing prowess, his physicality. They knew they needed another hand to row. You know, they knew that he was going to be a contributor. And how many other ship surgeons do you think would have been able to be
Yeah,
physically, imposing like that? That's
and
that's the question.
he learned this too, and then
Mhm.
said that he could have been a harpooner.
Well, and he later wrote about that same encounter and said that the guy, I think it was Walker, was the last man, gentleman's name, the sailor's name who he decked, and he had come
Yes.
to him later and said, "Had I known who you were, I wouldn't have done it." And he's like, "No, it's a good thing you did because that's how I got the job."
Yeah, I'd forgotten that Walker. That you're absolutely right. Was a guy named Walker. Yes.
Mhm.
All righty.
Um,
And one
but you
one
know, if you
last
read
thing, I'm gonna not sidetrack anymore, but I will post a link in the chat that there's this amazing pen that I will never be able to afford called it's part of an author's series of Mont Blanc, and that pen is so beautifully made and intricate. It has all of these etchings and inscriptions from his whaling time, and so it's a nautical themed pen, but it's way too much money.
All righty. Well, let's get to the story for goodness
Please.
sake.
It's a good one.
Because before we get to the story, I always like to look at how it's published. And the Collier with that picture that's on the deadly harpoon. It was published in Collier's 27 February 1904. And the cover illustration is just tremendously beautiful. Um, Here's the Collier holding a harpoon. I mean, I just love this orange, yellow,
Yes.
black, white combination going on here.
And was that
by the
special?
way, Ed,
Go ahead.
Yeah,
and Max, and everybody, Steele was known for
Frederick
liking.
Doyle Steele did these
Yeah,
illustrations. Yeah.
sorry, Frederick Doyle Steele was known for being particularly fond of this orange color,
Yes.
and in some correspondence, it's referred to as Steele's orange, and
Hmm.
it appears lots of places, such as the cover of my exhibition catalog.
Yes. Very good. It is a very common color that we use in the Sherlockian world, also because of the connection to Study in Scarlet too. I think it's close enough that we conflate the two, but I think you're right. That orangey fire engine orange is the steel color, and it looks like you've even got some on your background there in your library.
Um, well, yeah, maybe that's. Are you seeing that hound poster?
Well, a bit more red, it looks like the wall
Yeah, it's
color.
pretty. It's actually pretty red,
Okay.
but yeah.
You know what the cover reminds me of is the Baltimore or the Maryland flag, both in the fact that there's like these splotches of pattern and texture in the quadrants.
Is there someone smoking a cigarette on the America? Because that's the flag,
I
state
think it's a
flag that I
crab
want.
with a
That's
knife,
the
actually.
flag that I want. It was somebody's actually smoking a cigarette.
Yeah. All right. And
The
this is where I'm going to pull this out is I've actually got that one on my socks. Quite a few of the Collier's covers there.
The in the Colliers, of course, then there's a little illustrated heading for the story here. little title heading. And
Ed, if I may, in the Colliers, by the way,
sure.
there are these so to speak extra, often overlooked little illustrations. If you look at the that leading cap, for example, capital letter at the very beginning of the
Yeah.
story, and the scene behind the title, The Return of Sherlock Holmes. All the stories have this, and sometimes a few more.
And those are
Besides,
door steel as well, right?
Yeah.
yes, but they were which we don't normally list, so to speak, among the
Mhm.
steel illustrations.
Well, is this here at this where the title is this? I mean, this is someone walking. Is this
It could be Peter Carey, or it could
or,
be someone else.
or is this the guy walking past it at night and saw the silhouette in the window? I don't
You'd
know.
see a silhouette possibly,
Because the
but I think it's
door's open
probably
here. The door's cracked.
we
You
should
can,
get to that part of the story first.
we should.
Touche, Mr. McGee.
I would also say that Kristen brings up a really good point. There's a scene in here that we'll talk about in just a little bit, but I want to highlight that one because I went through and I asked a few of the BSI members who had been invested with names and characters from Black Peter, including Peter Blau, who is the Black Peter. And I have little vignettes to share about that because I just thought it's fun. You know, the BSI is the Baker Street Irregulars. It's the national organization for Sherlockians, of which, Glenn, you're the only invested member on this panel. You are invested as the origin of tree worship, I believe.
Yeah.
And is that a sly reference to apple, that it's an apple tree?
No, I had not at all. I had no associate at that point. I had no association with Apple. It's a
Wow.
slight reference to antiquarian books.
It's the collector. It's the book
It's
collector.
And
it would go
Book-
great on
book
that
collector.
gap in your shelf.
Yeah. There you go.
Right. Okay. So anyhow, but just for those who aren't aware, I think most people on the chat and in the viewing area know that the Baker Street Irregulars invest people with canonical names, so something connected to a story, character, etc. And so Peter Blau has been invested as Black Peter. He says he thinks it may just be, you know, a result of the name similarity, but he also
Oh
said
no,
beard.
no, no, Max, I can't. No, if you see pictures of Peter as a young
But
man,
he had a
he
black
had
beard.
he had a black. It was pretty. It was not my style, but cropped like this, not a big giant bushy one, but it
Okay.
was very black and very full.
Well, and what's funny about that is the black beard would go along with being called Blackbeard, but not necessarily Black Peter because he was named Black Peter because he was a jerk and he had these black moods. Unlike Peter Blau, who's just a great all-around character and in the Sherlockian world is one of the greats all time. But so Peter Blau, Woodman's Lee, Lee Shackelford, who was just invested, I think, 2 years ago, if I'm getting my dates right. Um, he's also a great guy, but he is new to the thing. But Woodman's Lee is where this takes place. He wanted me to talk about the fact that he thinks that this story is a little too PC. See, he and I are on the same wavelength. Puns abound. But when he says PC, he means there's too many
PC.
PCs.
Yes.
But Kristen brings up a point that he made, which is that scene of Holmes walking in the morning, and maybe we should get there, but that's one of his favorite scenes all time in the canon. Sherlock Holmes doing weird stuff.
We will get there in just
All
a
right.
minute. The Strand magazine cover well, it's the usual Strand magazine, but I always find it interesting of how they're crediting or what they're also pushing. And here it's Doyle up top, Sherlock Holmes, W. Jacobs. The last 3 or 4 months, he has shared the cover with
Title
Doyle.
billing.
That's how popular Jacobs now. Now people have only read The Monkey's Paw if you've read anything, but very, very popular author. But also Marie Corelli up here on the top here, and she's a name that a lot of people have forgotten. A sensational Gothic popular writer from the 1890s. Probably the best-selling novelist of the 1890s. I mean, she's credited with that by some critics. It's always hard to get exact numbers, but she's got a good chance of having sold more novels than any other writer in the 1890s. Um, she was also the highest paid author at one point. Um, and what I find interesting is that she had lots of male readers, and men loved reading Marie Corelli novels. But male authors at the time frequently would disparage her in letters or the press or to other people. But I often wonder if that wasn't just resentment that, like, here's this woman writer writing novels, these sensational novels that were selling exceptionally well, and they weren't selling nearly as well.
Well, and I would conjecture that you're absolutely right, but there were also a fair number of quote serious authors who had uncharitable things to say about any author, male or
Yes,
female, that were doing popular fiction.
especially when they were more popular
Above
than
and
they
beyond.
were.
Me,
Yeah,
you're no doubt right, but there's a double whammy for
yeah,
Corelli.
Mhm.
It was popular fiction, and that's not literature. That's
Right.
this other thing.
Doyle
well,
felt the same way about his
yeah,
own work.
Well, he was tormented by it. He wanted to be writing literature with a capital L,
Hmm.
and that certainly wasn't Sherlock,
No, that was a capital S.
right?
Well, I'd also point out that Marie Corelli wrote things about Christianity and spirituality that were decades ahead of where Doyle would be later, but also kind of dovetail into that sort of milieu that he became known for later in his life.
And Corelli also suffered an indignity much like Doyle. She was phenomenally exploited by the American pirateers.
Hmm.
Very, very. And the American pirateers had, among their tricks is, gee, let's see what's selling well in the UK, and that's what we'll steal. Well, that's what we'll borrow.
yeah,
Hmm.
And two, we were particularly looking in the UK because we don't have to translate.
yeah.
Right. English is English yet, for all our fears.
Right. She was relentlessly ripped off by the pirateers.
Now, I think I saw it in your collection, but don't you have a signature of that Doyle wrote that was like a pirate ship flag in your collection?
That's not in
That's
my
not.
collection. That was
Okay.
that was that was that was in Poznansky's. And
Okay.
honestly, I don't know where it is now. It
Okay.
did
I
not
think the
it,
first time I saw it was on a slide that you presented, maybe.
Oh yeah, I no no I certainly it's yes, I exploit it, but I think I properly attribute it. And yeah,
Oh, and Susan Dallinger points out that Peter was in the Navy, of course, which, the
Yeah.
naval connection. Yeah,
Yeah.
missed that one, but of course.
All righty. One last tidbit before we start literally talking about the text of the story. Claire Danes, viewer in Australia who has become kind of the poet laureate for these Rosenbeck Sherlock episodes, does a lot of Sherlockian poetry, and she has a little ditty for this story, as she always does, and it is Peter, Peter, drunken beater, fled his past, but doom was fleeter. He met his death with fearful yell, sent by a harpoon straight to hell. So well done, Claire.
brilliant,
Wow.
really
I like
well
that
done,
a lot.
That was great.
really
I
well done.
love Fleeter.
Yeah.
It reminds me of a mouse I once knew. And it was really negative mouse. I was like, die, Fleeter mouse, die.
Thank you.
Shame on you.
That was a good one. All righty. The story begins. I have never known my friend to be in better form, both mental and physical, than in the year 95. 1895. It is always 1895 in our memory for these stories, but apparently it was a very popular time, according to Watson. Increasing fame had brought within it an immense practice. What are you drinking,
This
Max?
is Diplomatico. I'm not going to interrupt. I'm just going to display it and as I reload.
All righty. Uh, Sherlock has gotten so popular because of the cases, and they're being published by Watson, that he's had lots of cases, and I I think it's easy to overlook this interesting thing that's going on here that Doyle does, in that it's the people are reading in 1904. This is March 1904. They're reading these stories, and they've been reading them, for 10 years, with a break in the middle. And but in the stories themselves, the readers are reading the stories of Sherlock Holmes, and this kind of blending of the Strand readership with the fictional universe, Pache, Sherlockians with a fictional universe that Doyle's created. And of course Sherlock's real, because it says in the stories that he's real, and this is the way the stories are being published, and this is how he's gotten famous. And there's this kind of real meta thing that goes on that I don't think Doyle was always aware that he was doing this, but it's what happened. I think it's one of the reasons that the Sherlockian, community gets created, because he makes a real world that his readers, Sherlock's readers, Watson's readers are also, Doyle's readers.
Hmm. Right.
And yeah,
It's a real publication about real events.
yeah,
And I'm not going to go pache nothing. I'm going to say that we don't have any of the manuscripts that Watson wrote and sent into Doyle either. And so it's very difficult to
yeah.
tell what was changed and what wasn't. But one of the fun things to think about is, we think of this as Victorian literature. By this point, it's not Victorian anymore. This is Edwardian. Um,
Well, it's Edwardian when it was published, but
right.
Doyle's still a Victorian writer. Like, you don't
But yes,
change
yes,
your
yes, yes.
readers
But
back there.
listen, this
Yeah,
is a period piece now. He's writing Victorian literature
true.
from 10 years in the future. So these are stories that happened 10 years ago. Imagine, this is set in the early 2010s, relative
Yeah,
to us. And so this is something that kind of gets lost as we think that these are contemporaneous stories, but they're not at this point.
yeah. They were in the beginning, and
Right.
then he kind of passes that as he kind of he still
Well,
imagines this older Sherlock world. I mean,
he-
there's still a telephone in a story at
yeah,
one point, but he doesn't really lean
right.
into it's the modern world.
In the 1895 conceit is that you can put these stories back into 1895, or you can set them in 1895, even if they're contemporaneous, and then that's another way of obfuscating who was involved. For example, if you've got a family that is this dysfunctional, you don't want to out them by calling them by name. So the names that we call these people, if this is the Carey family, right? Then you've just exposed some pretty shameful things happening in the marriage and the daughter's life that would be very unkind to publish without changing their names. So this is one of the things that chronologists, as you say, we're not going to get into chronology, but in the text of the story, it's 1895. It's July 1895. And it's in the midst of these amazing cases, Cardinal Tosca,
Yeah.
Canary Trainer, and probably 10 or 15 others at least that we know about.
Well,
But yeah,
first, he gives a shout out to the last story published, Duke of
mhm,
Holderness, Solitary Cyclist. That's from
indeed.
that story, and we get a little mention too about the money
Mhm.
that Sherlock Holmes and makes, that frequently.
That's the only time. That's the only time.
Yeah, like frequently he says that he would refuse big cases from wealthy people because he's more interested in the the strange and dramatic qualities that Watson likes to write up too. The Holmes wants the outre, cases. That's a word that Doyle used early on that he took from Poe. The outre cases, the strange, odd ones, and this is clearly one of them.
The singular. That's the word that I think comes up most frequently when I think about these stories, is Watson is telling us why this story is singular in its nature, as opposed to like, oh yeah, another one of these, lost dog cases. It's this every story almost to a fault has some piece or element that is so out there, so strange that I couldn't not publish it, even though I had to wait 10 years in order to make sure that, the client is dead or everyone involved is safe or it's not going to impact, I gave my word that everyone had to be dead before I would tell this story. That makes it even better because it's going to be good.
Unfortunately, it leaves out some of these cases, these unpublished ones that he mentions that he teases us with. Here, it's the sudden death of Cardinal Tosca, Wilson, the
Wilson.
notorious canary trainer.
Well, and fortunately, Nick Meyer found the case that contained the notorious canary
Yes.
trainer in a dispatch box.
Yeah.
So he was able to write that one up. I think I've got it on my shelf up there
One
next
of
to
the
the new
I
one.
think one of the things
Why do
that
you think? Why do you think Watson dangled I mean, he does it multiple
he
times,
does.
and I don't have an answer.
I love how
And
some of these stories have these teasing phrases that really give extra impetus to like that's a, the notorious canary trainer,
Oh,
the
my favorite is
giant
the
rat of Sumatra that comes up, the aluminium crutch.
crutch,
the
the
throwing false
lighthouse,
teeth
the
across the breakfast
politician,
table.
the trained
I
cormorant.
mean,
Yeah.
I mean, so why?
Well, it's also because these are the cases that he's thinking about, right? Let's put on our Sherlockian hat as opposed to our literary analyst hat. And Watson is in the middle of some of these cases. He's just completed some of the work, or he's looking over his notes, but he's like, I can't publish that one, but I really wish I could. I got to tell everybody there's a thing I'm working on. And it also is, this is an advertisement for their services. Remember, they're still in practice. And so the more they can name drop, I happened to work for the Pope just the other day. No big deal.
Can't tell
I
you
don't
why,
and
but
I don't charge a whole lot of
yeah,
money unless you're the Duke of
yeah.
Holderness. I mean, just saying, come on, bring us your business. So it's an advertisement. And this, all right, verisimilitude is also really important in these stories. It immerses you because they're real.
And it's the same argument works for both. It's that tease. It's that like there's
Mhm.
this extraordinary world here that like I'm only giving you a glimpse of that makes you want to be invested even more. And if you're Watson, it's these extraordinary cases. And wouldn't
Right.
you want to invest in Sherlock Holmes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think that there is an element, especially early on in the stories, he's referring back to the Sign of Four and Mary Morstan, and that is an element. I really do think of this new genre type where it is um, episodic stories. They don't have to be read in a particular order. And so it's not like previously on the adventures of Sherlock Holmes, he was trapped in a box and how's he going to get out of it? It's more like just this referential continuity. And that's one of the reasons that this work, this body of work is so interesting from the standpoint of a chronologist, is that you're trying to make sense of those references. There are some things you just can't get around. Like having his wife dead, no mention of another Watson's wife Mary, whom he meets in Sign of Four, goes on to marry, and then suddenly, his bereavement in another story, not too far off of that,
Empty
and
house
then
when he mentions the bereavement.
suddenly back to being married again, and he's living with his wife, and it's a different wife. Her name is also Mary. She calls him James. What the heck? And what does this mean? Is this a conspiracy? And I don't think we had the term red pill back then, but I think chronologists are all red pills.
I'll let people look up red pill, blue pill. So
Oh, it's a Matrix reference. It's
yes,
the world in which we live.
yes. Thank you. It is it astounds me this this it astounds me that Doyle was 100% complicit in creating this meta universe
Mhm.
with and now authors know when they're doing it. Doyle, I don't think was planning this world
Mhm.
as much
Well,
as it
and
happens now.
if he did, it's all the more amazing
Yeah.
that he was able to sit down and not I think you called it something like parthenogenesis, Glenn, where it just kind of sprung from Zeus's head and it was on the page. He's working on this over the course of weeks, so he has time to sit and think with it. But when he goes to write, he's not circling back and like, making a template and oh, I need to correct this element. And I've tried. I've written pastiches. I think you and I have talked about one that I'm in the works on that is done, except it sucks. And so I'm trying to figure out how to make it not bad. but it's very difficult.
Well, I mean, Conan Doyle was like Mozart.
Yeah, yeah,
Were fully,
exactly.
the pieces were fully formed in his head, and
Yeah.
he
Mhm.
and just had to copy them out.
And the quantity. That's the other piece that he's like Mozart in that it's the quality. We still remember him for his quality, but he was a doer. I was just on a different podcast. Sorry, Ed, I was cheating on you. Um, but
I
you
listened
introduced
to it.
us
I
to Bruce.
introduced you to that podcast.
Um, but in that research, he was writing Ring of Thoth or Thoth when he was also writing Sign of Four. He was writing, lot number 249 in the midst of his Boer War campaign, magnum opus that got him knighted. This man was a machine. And I don't mean it like AI. I just mean like he just kept going and going, Energizer Bunny style. And I think we don't think about the White Company anymore, but like that was a magnum opus from any other author. But the fact that he wrote Sherlock Holmes too, it's
Well,
completely
it was
buried.
also the work he was most proud of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's entertaining. There's a lot of people that really like the
Yeah.
White
I
Company.
just read it last year. So, all righty. But,
Yeah.
the more you talk, the more rum I drink. So maybe that's the fun experiment.
That's
Okay.
the me
I
too.
gotta get I gotta get through this show. Um,
Right.
but let's get back to the story because at this point, Watson also mentions that he knows Holmes is busy on the case because these rough-looking men keep showing up at Baker Street asking for Captain Basil. And so Watson knows that Sherlock is using some kind of disguise, as he usually does, and these people are showing up for that. Carey, one of our watch, I think you're in the audience today, Carey, had sent me a question by email. And she says, how do we know that the several rough-looking men, or at least some of them, who called were not Holmes in disguise? Watson had failed to recognize Holmes in disguise before, so maybe those men were Holmes checking up that Watson was okay. I think it would be hilarious if one of those was Holmes, but the story doesn't tell us that. But I also think that what we do know from Holmes in the stories that Watson's revealed so far, every time he fools him, he lets him know he fooled him. He'll take off the disguise and say,
That's right.
"Ah, you thought I was," and and likes to do that. So I can't imagine Holmes not revealing that he's in disguise after he has tricked Watson to think that he was. So
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that there's any indication in the story that he would do that or that Watson needed it, frankly. Holmes pretty much leaves Watson on his own
yeah.
in half the stories. And then he berates him for not doing what he would have done if he'd gone to the place or whatever. But yeah, he's not a shrinking violet.
We also learned this other little tidbit that never gets pursued, I don't think, in a story, is that he also has five refuges in London.
Oh, yeah.
He has secret places where he can put his disguises on, operate out of, and I think this is the only story that this detail gets mentioned in.
Yeah, he has other stories in which there are costumes and disguises, but many of those are just like I've got a corner in my bedroom that has wigs and prosthetics and things like that. And so he knows, for example, the man with the twisted lip, he knows that there's a prosthetic involved.
Yeah.
Um, but no, what's really interesting, the first time I read this, I was a different person. But since having read it the first time and, other media that I consume, The Americans does a really good job of showing these sort of not just dead drops, but little hideaways where this is the FX show, The Americans, about the Soviet Union spies that live in the United States, the sleeper cell. Yeah, yeah.
What?
Yeah, one of them's named Elon. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. No, I won't give anything away. That's for another election.
Well, that show's set in the 80s, wasn't it, though? Yeah.
Yes, it was. But um, Matthew, oh, what's the main actor's name? He ended up playing young Matlock later on too, or young. I'm sorry, not Matlock.
I
Oh,
don't know. You're down a rabbit hole now,
yeah,
dude.
yeah. It doesn't matter. Anyway, Matthew Reese ended up playing a young Ironsides. What's the name of that lawyer? Um,
Raymond Burr.
Raymond
Yes.
Burr is the actor who played not Matlock.
Perry Mason?
Perry
Perry
Mason, thank you
Mason.
very much. He
Thank you.
played Action Perry Mason in an HBO series.
Yes, he did.
But in the Americans, they go to great lengths to show various methods of disguise, and they have these drop areas that are very small, like little garages, for example, around New York or around, Chicago, where when you're there, you have a safe house essentially that's been set up for your use,
Yeah.
whether it's by you or someone else. And it's got a change of clothes. It's got something to disguise you, a wig, glasses, hat, some facial makeup, whatever. And so it's a very common piece of
Yeah.
spycraft.
I like the idea that Holmes has these play, and you can imagine that they're in some of them are perhaps in dangerous areas where
Right. And how did Watson find out about it? He must have been told by Holmes, except in my opinion, maybe that was
I
something
don't
that he
know.
didn't know about in the first half of their time working together. Because
My
I
dear
think he's,
fellow, I need a place to take a young woman, and maybe
well, three continents,
Oh, no,
Watson.
no, no, no.
and
Watson
bring
would
her back to Baker
would be
Street.
a classier place than a hidey hole.
There you
Yeah.
go. Yes, he'd be at a hotel somewhere.
Yeah, come on.
All righty. Well, Holmes shows up holding a huge barb-headed spear tucked like an umbrella under his arm. And I love this little dialogue between Sherlock and Watson here. You don't mean to say you've been walking about London with that thing, and
No,
um,
I hired a cab.
yeah. That's like a Nigel Bruce could have done justice to that line, that's because it's a little silly, and it works in that.
I definitely also got a little, you squashed my peas. Like, that's improper. Why would you do that? But this is what we love about Holmes is that he just completely bucks all of the
He
social.
breaks the rules. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And he does it with a purpose. He's not just an eccentric. He says, these rules are good for society, but in order to solve this case, I need to go a different direction.
And Paget did choose to illustrate this, thank goodness, because this one needs to be illustrated. Him walking into the room here,
Hmm.
looking very, very gaunt here, very thin. But you could see that the head here is really it's pointed here, and then it has these two
Two
barbs
barbs.
that
Yes.
come off, which are needed when you harpoon the whale, because then it goes in and then it has to stick.
And yet Paget disagree, or I'm sorry, Steele disagrees. As you mentioned,
Yes,
Steele is drawing what are called,
basically a lance.
yeah, a lance with a sharp head, that's sort of a cardioid shape, a heart. And
But
so those, yeah,
this one looks, I mean, the head here is actually that's what's on this,
with the barbs.
projectile.
Yes. And that
Uh,
is a modern adaptation. That's
yeah,
a lot like one of those hunter's arrows that collapses and then springs out when it gets
yeah,
inside so that it can't be
yeah.
removed.
Some of the early ones, actually, when we had a Melville exhibition at the
Mhm.
Rosenbach, we had a couple of harpoon heads that we had borrowed from another place, and we had one that has one of those.
Well, you
Oh,
get that. Let me tell you a story. So
go ahead.
Peter Blau's element that he drew my attention to. So a few points I asked for from folks who had been invested with regard to this story. And one is that in the story, it is claimed that Holmes was using a harpoon. In those illustrations, it looks very much like he's got what are called the harpoon irons, which is the long bit that's at the front. In the Paget illustration, that is a two flue, meaning that it has two arms that come off, barbed version, which is almost like a fishing hook. So it would go out and it would get stuck. It could collapse a little bit, sort of spring loaded. So as it
Mhm.
went in, it would carve deeper. And then if it was pulled, which whales invariably run,
Yeah, because
just
they're
like
they're
fish,
gonna tow it. Yeah.
it then expands out to make it harder for that barbed or the harpoon to be removed. But
Some
he's
of
also
them,
in that illustration, it's a very slender bar as
yeah.
opposed to the wooden handle, which is what you would use.
Some of them had, here's one at the top here. This might be the
Mhm.
great. I can't, get too close with that of blaring up, but these were the toggle headed ones.
Mhm.
And here's the
Or a
socket.
temple.
Here's the socket where it would go into the wood, and you would throw it in, and as it would go in, and then as it tried the whale pulled, it would move, and
Mhm.
so then it would stay locked
So
into
I
the.
am actually a member of Black Peter's rum-soaked harpooners. This is um, a model of that. This would be on a swivel, and it would cut deeply in. There'd be a toggle, like you say, an actual like piece of wood here. And when it would go in, it would slice deeply and be stuck. You'd tie this onto your ship's line, or your not your ship, I'm sorry. You'd go out in a whaling boat, like kind of a dinghy, like a 10 to 6 to 10 person, 12 person vessel. Um, and you tie that onto the ship and you get close to the whale because whales don't know that you're evil and trying to take their oil. Um, You'd stab it in, and sometimes you'd lose the wooden piece, but the tip is actually what was important. That was the harpoon iron.
Yeah,
And this would swivel then as it would come out. This was designed to go horizontal. This doesn't work on my model, but it would go horizontal and be even wider, just like what you showed. And it would lock into that whale flesh, the blubber. And then you would just go for what's called the Nantucket sleigh ride, which could be 10, could be 20 miles away from the ship that you're whaling. And you'd end up, exhausted, but so would the whale.
yeah.
And so the concept of that harpoon is just to keep you near it as it's exhausting. And also, some whales, when they die, would sink. And so that would be a complete loss if you weren't there to go in at it. Then you also have a spear. This would be a very, very sharp, very narrow blade, almost like a scalpel. In fact, it kind of has a resemblance of a scalpel. It would be very similarly equipped, but you'd actually just be trying to poke
Yeah.
holes in the whale.
And they would finish off the whale. They would puncture its lungs usually.
From what I heard, they just bleed profusely. They don't have the ability to heal
Yeah.
like wounds like this. And so if they dove down, even worse, because the pressure of the sea would then cause them to bleed, bleed out, hemorrhage. And then you'd end up rowing back. And so you could be rowing an entire day with a whale carcass behind you.
I recently was trying to get one on eBay, an authentic one on eBay,
Whale?
and I got outbid very quickly.
Oh, sure. They go for thousands now.
Yeah, but
An
it was so
actual,
low, and I was like, yeah, you never know. Maybe somebody's not paying attention,
yeah.
and then people were paying attention by the end
Yep.
of the auction. I couldn't get it, but yeah,
Cou- A couple of interesting connections. I was reading a biography of Frederick Douglass, who was involved in the New Bedford whaling industry in Massachusetts. He was a caulker. He was one of the ones that would waterproof boats before he became a public speaker and a public figure. But New Bedford was the center of whaling in the United States, and they would originally would go out and they'd try to jab a whale with a harpoon, draw it back to land to process it. They wouldn't necessarily have a ship where they could follow them. And they overfished to such an extent that they needed to then develop a different industry. So whaling by ship was a result of overfishing the locality
hmm
and then having to seek out another industry. Like this is a technological advancement. It's rivals the printing press in some ways that it allowed us to read um, after dark because of the whale oil.
By the time Doyle had gone on that ship in the Arctic in the 1880s, I think it was early 1880s, he said that like they came across one whale, maybe two. I mean, they
They had
were
to go
just
farther north,
they weren't
of the
even
country.
coming across them anymore. It'd been decimated. Lots of seals they could
Yeah.
harvest, but they couldn't. They were barely finding the whales by then. As
They
they,
ended up finding one, and it
yeah,
was something to the tune of it would be 1,000 pounds, and that would make their entire journey worth it
yeah.
because it was getting more and more expensive to use whale oil. So whale oil would be in an oil lamp, so like kind of the kerosene lamps we know today would have been oil, and
Yeah,
whale oil burns a lot cleaner than kerosene.
yeah.
And so that was again, technological breakthrough was using whale oil as your lighting source.
We have a couple old, well, they're beautiful also lamps that were at the Rosenbach that were designed
Hmm.
originally. They would have held whale oil to light them.
Can I just
I,
one back to the story? And I know I tangentialized, but Peter
please.
Blau, specifically in your book, The Deadly Harpoon, posits that Watson and Holmes didn't actually know the difference between, or at least Watson didn't know the difference between the lance and the harpoon itself. And so it
But the
would
picture in that harpoon that Paget drew
that was
is
a harpoon.
that has those
Right, and it is a
fluted edges.
two-flued harpoon, meaning two
Grooves.
sort of arms. The flue is also is the name of the thing that we think of in the chimney that allows the smoke and hot gas to escape. But it's from a similar term for the two arms of the harpoon. But the lance would have actually been what a sailor would have picked off the wall. So there were three harpoons on the wall,
Yeah,
remember? And the other might have been one of these, which is called I believe, a flesher or fleischer, which is how to peel the skin and blubber off of the carcass.
yeah,
And so that would be a processing blade. But I don't think Paget knew that. And so the three that you see on the wall, or is it steel, where it shows two that are still on the wall, and they are all identical with barbs, the two flues barbs. Well, in this particular story, Peter Blau, I think, is right. Of course, it's Peter Blau. Um, he believes that it would have been the lance rather than a harpoon proper, because a harpoon can't go through flesh the way that it was described. And so Holmes couldn't penetrate the pig carcass.
yeah.
And I think that's great. This is the type of thing that I love about
It
Sherlockians.
is. It's that, a harpoon was not going to be able to go entirely through him, most likely, and pin him to the wall.
Right.
The
But a
lens
lance would have
may.
gone through like butter, like parsley through butter.
Well, it depends on how many days the parsley's sitting on the butter. We haven't gotten to that story yet. We will one day. All righty. Harpoons. I thought I would do a drinking game where every time harpoon is mentioned, we drink, but then I counted the harpoons. I was like, oh, I can't even do that. So it would be a drunken game, not a drinking game. All righty. He's been, they have this conversation. I've been, he's been. If you would have seen a dead pig swung from a hook in the ceiling, and a gentleman in his shirt sleeves furiously stabbing at it with this weapon. This is what he's been doing. He's been spending a day stabbing at a pig to see how far he could get the harpoon into it. Um, Perhaps you would care to try. Not for the world, not for worlds. Watson says. Um, and then Holmes thinks, it might have a bearing on the mystery of Woodman's Lee. Um, this mystery that has happened. And then Hopkins shows up. Stanley Hopkins. Um, Glenn Holmes says that well, he's a young police inspector, and Watson says Holmes had a high hopes, while he in turn professed the admiration and respect of a pupil for the scientific methods of the famous amateur. Um, Glenn, why, after reading this story, where we have think that he had high hopes for Stanley Hopkins?
Well, I tell you, I'm very hard to explain it. In fact, Stanley Hopkins presents a handful of mysteries.
Yeah,
Uh, One is certainly he doesn't demonstrate any particular acuity actually in any of the stories in which he appears, let alone Black Peter. And the
he will be in more. We will see him again. He will himself
well,
turn up in two more, but it will be mentioned
well,
he
well,
helped
in fact,
on more
it'll
cases.
show up he's mentioned in four.
Yeah,
If
mentioned in four.
four, shows up in three.
Hmm.
Um, I'm actually on the computer double checking. Abbey Grange, it's mentioned that he reached out to Holmes on 7 occasions.
Yeah.
And so at least they crossed paths in a non-trivial way 7 times, of which we only know about four at all. So that's a conundrum. Another conundrum is this talented upcoming guy makes, first of all, seems to be easily confused. In every one of the cases, he's stretched beyond his limits
Yeah.
semi-instantaneously. Black Peter in particular, he makes a handful of rookie blunders. Like, oh, I don't know, should we leave the door open? I mean, no, you don't want to leave the door open if a guy, anyway.
Yeah.
And so it's, I think maybe it was Nick Utekin who speculated that maybe Holmes had a fond view of Hopkins because he was so incredibly deferential. You know, Hopkins remarks, shame on me. I forgot I was but the student learning from the
Yeah.
master. And I'm pretty sure it was Nick Utekin says, maybe Holmes was just, we know Holmes is vain,
Yes.
was so taken in by this flattery that he viewed him. That was why he viewed him in a positive light.
Yes, it's the admiration and respect of a pupil for him.
I was moderately close.
Yes, that he,
yeah, admiration of a pupil to the master.
Mr. Holmes, and he can do that with him. He's the inept policeman. I mean, we've had Gregson in 4 stories. You get Lestrade in 7. Lestrade in 13, actually. We've done 6 of those. 7 more he'll turn up in. But that inept policeman, that inept official, is one of the mainstays, one of the tropes of the mystery detective story, as established by Edgar Allan Poe. Seemingly insoluble mystery. Detective is a genius. There is a less astute companion narrator, in this case Watson. It is not the solution itself that's important, but the way the detective figures it out. And the 5th thing is the inept official force, which is why this detective is needed to solve this case. I mean, of course, if it's a police procedural, then it's not necessarily, he's not inept because he is the police detective. But usually in a police procedural, there's actual, like, he's often working against the ineptitude or corruption of the department, and he has to solve it anyway. So, but that inept thing is one of the 5, things that Poe had set up early that Doyle really seems to want to follow and acknowledged. He always acknowledged this.
I think he's also an agent of the author. The reason that he's inept is because we're setting up the reader for red herrings, right?
Yeah.
We're believing Stanley Hopkins for one thing because the narrative has built him up. He also, one thing I think that he does better than any of the other Scotland Yard detectives is say, like, I'm actually a protege of Holmes. I'm not so vain as to believe that the police force is better than Holmes. I know your methods and I'm attempting to apply them. I mean, he's paraphrasing Holmes talking to Watson. You know my methods, apply them. And so he's listening to what Holmes is saying. He may not be good at it, but I think that's why Holmes is encouraging him, is because he sees maybe some of his own curiosity, his own intellectual creativity, maybe that was lacking in the others, like Lestrade, who has the bravado but doesn't have the skill.
Yeah. Lauren Ann makes a comment in the chat here that, that he's the Hopkins is the only one who, like, oh my gosh, Mr. Holmes, you're such a genius. Gregson doesn't do that. Lestrade has a couple moments where he compliments Holmes, especially in 6 Napoleons, which we'll get to. But this is the only one who doesn't think that, or who doesn't make comments like, "Oh, well, yeah, of course you. I mean, I would have solved it too." Like Lestrade.
Well, no, there's another. I'm blocking on the story where they're poring over a letter.
Is it Norwood Builder?
Yes, and he says, "Gee, I thought I'd gotten all the information, but you squeezed a little more. You were able to squeeze a little more juice out of it."
Right.
I'm quibbling with you. There's at least one, and maybe this is the only other one, where there's an inspector who acknowledges Holmes' superior.
Hopkins all the way through, though, is completely in.
Like I said, it's a nit, but there's at least one other place.
And it's because they believe Holmes has got it right. They aren't arguing with him about, I have my theory. You go ahead and prosecute your own, Holmes. I think what is it? The Illustrious Client. The story, The Illustrious Client, is one of those where the wedding and they drag the Serpentine, and Lestrade is like, "Oh, you don't think she went into the Serpentine, Holmes? Well, how did her dress get up?" And so it's like that same hubris of the detection or the primary force.
Madeline said that was Inspector Baines in Wisteria.
Baines,
We'll
Wisteria. Okay.
get to
That
that.
was it, Baines.
Also,
get to
this is the earlier we had a discussion of the Norwegian explorer's new pin. This is that one. And then I also have the one that I was referring to. I just realized they're on my desk, so I might as well show them. This is the steel illustration that I was referring to earlier that they've made into their logo as well.
Yeah.
So,
all righty. Hopkins can't figure out this murder at Woodman's Lee, and he was wondering if Holmes could. And Holmes says, "Dear me, I must have a look at the matter." And I love this because it's not quite evident yet, but he's literally been investigating this for since he read about it in setting himself up as Captain Basil and doing this stuff using the harpoon. He has already been on the case.
He has been working on this assiduously
and waiting for Hopkins to come. And Hopkins finally comes and he's like, "Oh, could you help me?" "Oh, well, sure. I think I could maybe look at it. Oh, I've got other things. I'm not sure if I could fit it in."
right. And he's already halfway down the solution too.
We'll get to that later, how close Holmes it is to solve this, because as we get to the end. But Sherlock gives him hints right away too. He says,
I don't think Holmes is particularly close until the mysterious visitor in the night is anywhere close until the mysterious visitor.
Well, there's something he doesn't know yet, and that he discovers.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
The murder, he's almost got the actual perpetrator in his hand.
He knows that a harpooner from a ship killed him, and he's already trying to find the harpooner.
Yes.
But he says, he gives him a hint. "Oh, what about the tobacco pouch?"
Didn't he ask about the pipe first?
And Hopkins is, well, he says, "What about the absence
of a pipe?"
Right.
And he says the initials, and he says, "But he had no pipe." And well, we couldn't find a pipe, and actually smoked very little, but he might have kept the tobacco for his friends.
This is the
Max,
first
how
time.
much tobacco do you have? If I visit you, do you have some tobacco for me?
I've actually got some Arcadia mixture. That's the only thing I've
got.
I
gave you.
Yes. And I'm never going to smoke it because this is an Ed Pettit Arcadia mixture. Anyhow, but I will say that this is the first time through reading this that I realized how close this story is to Silver Blaze. That, the dog that did nothing in the nighttime is the pipe, and it's the whiskey and brandy.
There you go. The one pipe problem right here.
Right. This is happening in Surrey, by the way. You and I off. Oh, go ahead, Glenn.
No, I was going to say certainly no argument, but you bring up something which another thing which troubles me, and that's the whiskey and the brandy.
We'll get to it. I don't want to talk about whiskey and brandy yet. We'll get it. We're going to get to
it. Okay.
That's hour 4.
Yeah. Holmes even tells Hopkins that if I were handling the case, that's where I would have started. Like, he's instructing him how to run the case, but also this has got to be so bewildering for Hopkins. He's like, because he hadn't thought of any of this.
And I also think that's Holmes posturing a great deal.
Yeah.
I think he's already figured out a lot, and now that
now I've got to show this kid,
and I got to show this kid.
Yeah.
So I don't buy that. That's where even Holmes would have started the case.
There's a great deal of showmanship. You are 100% accurate identifying that. You know this from other stories, right? He says it. He says, I have to put on a show. If I just tell you.
Oh, if I just tell the answer, then suddenly it's not. Well, it suddenly doesn't seem so fast.
And it's prosaic.
In the Red-Headed League, he says, when I reveal my method, suddenly doesn't seem so remarkable.
Yeah, Micah Cover is a magician and a Sherlockian magician who I think sometimes attends these. I don't see him on the chat today, but I think of Holmes as a great magician, that he's always got something to show the audience or the inspector while he's doing things that they don't see. He's doing research, he's doing investigatory work, and that part of the appeal and the beauty of Holmes in his deductions is that he doesn't always know the answer. And in fact, there's a scene in this story where he goes, "Hmm, that's surprising. Like, this changes everything."
Holmes is like the
Uh,
Penn and Teller magician too, where he reveals the secret at the end. Like he'll
Yes.
tell, like this is all about me telling you how to do
Yeah.
this.
Ed, are you going to be bringing up Milne later?
Yes, we should when we get
Then
to
I will. Then I'll hold on. Then I'll making a list of things I'm holding on to.
good. Remind me if I don't.
I love you guys. I've had enough rum, I can say it. I love Sherlockians who do this because it's like we're now doing Holmes thing, right? Wait until the reveal.
um, Hopkins now tells the story. And usually this is the client position, although it's occasionally an official who comes in and tells the story. And I mentioned this before, but these I love moments in this story because what they remind us of is that Sherlock Holmes stories are stories about people telling stories.
Hmm.
And then Sherlock constructs stories to explain the mysteries in the stories. And it just goes ever on. Like we're reading stories with characters telling stories, characters also creating stories. It's this kind of I honestly think it's one of the reasons why Sherlock Holmes became so popular is because it appeals to the thing that humans need. Humans need to hear stories, and these
Yes.
are stories about stories about stories about stories, and they really bring us into it by more people coming out and telling stories. And if you think about it, you read very little fiction where this goes on, actually.
Hmm.
Usually it's the work itself that is telling the story, and that's the attraction. But Doyle always adds the element of the people within the story are going to tell stories. And this
And
is
they go
something that
deeper.
older authors used to do more often than
Hmm.
than more recent ones do.
That's what I miss in Golden Age mystery is that a lot of times it's straight ahead. It's narrative, it's plot. Um, but I think of Canterbury Tales. I think of Dickens, where you just go off on a tangent where somebody tells you an amusing story about a mail
People will
truck.
walk in and tell a story, yeah. So
Yeah, yeah, and that is part of the appeal of some of these stories that are period is authors aren't allowed to do that anymore, it seems like. Like we don't have the patience.
authors can, editors will cut it out.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. Is that
Maltese Falcon, the Flitcraft story, always gets cut out of
yes,
adaptations, and that is the story that is so key to that
right.
work that they can't do it in a modern adaptation. So
Yep. Well, and I guess that's my point is that either the audience doesn't have the um, patience, the attention span, or the people that are making the media that control it, the editors, the publishers, the producers, they don't believe that the audience has that attention span,
that's
even
what
if
I
that's false.
that's what I think. All righty.
Well, yeah, again, it depends on the media.
Hmm.
You certainly, for example, I agree with you guys, overall, but when you're talking about the visual media,
Yeah.
movies and so on and so forth, how much patience do you have for Captain Exposition being the main character in the story?
What can
You
I
want
tell
to
you?
you
Okay.
want to see
Oh,
the story telling the story, not
yes, you're right.
not a,
I want to see
not a
it.
narrative in the visual media.
You're right.
Yeah.
I'm quibbling with your
Yes.
earlier
You're 100%
visual
right. But
media.
in
We wouldn't like
You need
literature,
it
because
acted out. You need it shown.
literature.
Yeah.
You guys are absolutely,
yeah.
I think, correct and a correct observation.
You know what?
But
The
with visual
tangent,
media, we
though,
just
the
don't.
Voyage of the Demeter, the most recent or one of the recent Dracula adaptations, the
Yeah.
Voyage of the Demeter, it's a total tangent. We don't know anything about the Demeter, but it's so interesting to imagine what if. Like, so this is where I think you're right, Glenn. Like, yes, anding you is this long form media that we have because of Amazon Prime and Netflix and FX and whatever, and Apple TV now. Like Severance is one of my
So
favorite shows.
they're also visual media.
Yes.
They're
Yes.
not narrative. They're
Yeah.
not narrative media, or using them for narration is weak.
You're right.
It's more,
The show them, not tell them still applies, right?
right.
But they can go down rabbit holes, you know, and you can go on those tangents in a way that's really satisfying.
Yeah, no, for sure.
I'm the only person who's happy to see the return of 3.5 hour movies
My bladder is
that have
not happy
flooded the
with those.
market these
Boy, I
days.
was going to say that's one of the advantages of
The only
watching
one.
at home. You can run off to the bathroom.
That's true. I still need that because I watch almost everything from home now. All
I
right.
I am yeah, I can't do theaters anymore. I
Hopkins
apologize.
tells the story, and it's about Peter Carey. He captained a whale and seal hunting ship just as Doyle was on.
The SSC Unicorn.
Seal and whale fisher, the sea unicorn, and then he retired. Just details about him. He's a silent, gloomy fellow. He's got a wife and a daughter who's 20. But he's also a terrible drunkard, and he's a fiend when he drinks. He beats them to the point where they're screaming, running from the house, and everybody knows this is going on. He once even assaulted the old vicar of where he lives, and this is he was known
And
in the
one of the troubling things over any number of the stories is there's a theme is too strong a word, but this abuse of women.
yeah.
You know, even
Yeah.
in the Copper Beaches
Oh,
forces her to cut her hair
solitary
off.
cyclist right before.
Solitary cyclist, a forced marriage.
Yeah.
The Hound of the Baskervilles, Beryl is chained up. It's
Mhm. Yeah,
reasonably common in the stories.
and it makes the evildoer even more evil
Yeah.
because these are people who love him,
Well, for
right?
sure.
He is doing evil against people who care about him, that bring him his food, you know, that support him. And I got to say, I wondered if there'd been presentations by, Monica Schmidt, well-known Sherlockian who diagnoses folks in the canon. I don't know that I've seen one
Be
about.
on next month, next episode.
Oh, ask her about Peter Carey because I'd love to hear if it's just substance abuse disorder with alcohol or if it's something
Well,
more serious.
it also mentions in the text that he was known in the trade. He
Hmm.
was known as Black Peter, as
Yeah,
somebody who would
his
be
dark
violent
moods.
and dark moods and all this stuff.
Right.
And sure, it could have
Yeah.
been the alcohol, like when he was drunk, but
Hmm.
clearly this is a violent, mean man who everybody know what not I Hopkins says I have not heard one single word of sorrow.
Not to excuse his behavior, but also potentially mentally ill. That's why I would say that I think it'd be interesting to hear Monica's take on it. It's possible that he's recreating the cabin because he's having hallucinations. Schizophrenia is a I'm not going to diagnose. I got nothing. Like I have no knowledge, but this reminds me of more serious than just an alcoholic, abusive guy.
I do find that point you bring up, Glenn, that this, this violence against women, this mistreatment of women happens so much in Doyle's, stories is it's certainly a way for that he is absolutely calling this out in his society, that this happens too frequently, and this is a crime that needs to be, addressed. Um, uh, it, it it may spring from his kind of more traditional chivalrous ideas that men need to protect women, not hurt them. But the end game still is that Doyle recognizes this goes on and recognizes that this is a frequent crime.
Yeah,
And
and thinking about it, I don't know that I'm summarizing all the events, all such events in the stories, but bad things happen to the malefactors.
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't recall anything particularly evil having to Jethro Rucastle, but at least in the end, she runs off with her money and has a happy life, and he's left with nothing. But
No, he gets
but
attacked by the
Oh,
dog.
he gets his neck
oh,
ripped off.
sorry, yeah, no, he has his throat
Carlo,
torn out by the dog. Yeah,
Carlo,
no, Carlo
Yeah.
takes care of him. No,
No, you're
absolutely
fine. You're
right.
fine. I was
No,
just like, yeah, I
right.
think he did.
Carlo
No,
gets
no, no,
him
no.
in the
Absolutely,
end.
Carlo takes care of him.
Even mistreating the dog. Even the dog gets his revenge on him. Yeah.
I
This is
feel
Yeah.
it.
like
This is
the
in
one place,
Copper Beaches, everyone. If you they
yeah, the one place where you know from Copper Beaches, Ed, um, but the one place I think that this is maybe misplaced is the Hound of the Baskervilles. that I was actually rooting for the Hound to come out of this.
Yes.
As I would love. Can you imagine a Sherlock
Or
Holmes and
Hound.
Hound series where he tames the vicious beast?
Sherlock and Hound.
Right, and he uses this spectral hound. He has a communicatory device to the afterlife because
Right.
it's half. Anyway, there
You
you
write
go.
that one. You write that one.
You're right. Yeah.
Um,
Go ahead, Max. Write that one up.
But that's I will say that's an innocent dog who should not have been killed.
Black Peter has his own shed. He's not two sheds, Carey, as a Monty Python reference. He is one shed, Carey, and he has a shed that he calls the cabin. It is where it's set up like we learn like a ship's cabin, and that's where the murder happened. Um, Hopkins describes the murder, and Doyle goes all in on having Hopkins describe the murder. It was, when Hopkins goes in and finds the body, it was droning like a harmonium with the flies and blue bottles, and the floor and walls were like a slaughterhouse. And and then he describes him pinned to the wall. And here's where we get a difference between the manuscript. I didn't ask you for this manuscript page, Glenn. I should have. In the manuscript, and it says his face was twisted like a damned soul. But the Strand can't do damned because this is policy. You don't use that word, or you don't use the name of God. So it was like a lost soul in hell in the Strand. Collier's Americans had no problem. It was a
No,
damned
Americans
soul
had no problem.
with that. Um, but that's one of the differences between the editions that we're reading. Later, we'll have another edit that happens in that. But his face twisted like a lost soul in hell, or like a damned soul in hell. His great brindled beard. This is how we know that it's not just a black beard, right? Mag Brindled is a streaked beard.
Brindled is
white.
lighter colored. It's sort of like a gray potentially, but also like a blonde. That it's got streaks of blonde running
It's got
through it.
streaks in it. I think streaks is
Yeah.
it. Is that
I
is it
think
referred to?
I think it is streaks, and 20
Yeah.
years ago mine was brindled.
Yeah.
But that's
I
a
brindled
couple
mine
of
up just for the
Yeah.
podcast here.
I was born with this, literally. So I came out like this. So
Yeah.
always been this white gray beard. Uh, the right through his broad breast, the steel harpoon had been driven, and it had sunk deep into the wood of the wall behind him. He was pinned like a beetle on a card. I love that.
Does that remind you of Hunt of the Baskervilles again? Because of the Stapleton's bug collection?
Yeah, there you go. Stapleton's bug collection that he's got. Everything's, pinned to a card. Well,
and let's not forget the literary agent's inclination to the Gothic.
Mhm.
yes.
With most of the references, Ed, that you just mentioned are very Gothic.
And very sensational.
The sensational, the images they connote. This is Conan Doyle's Gothic soul peering out.
Right. This is one of the more
protective
gruesome
sword.
scenes in the canon. Yeah, right. The blood
I've seen
everywhere,
this. Yeah.
a body pinned to the wall. It's not just horrific, it's gruesome.
The uh Hopkins tries to be like Holmes, investigates for the footmarks, but he says there were none, and Holmes right away is pointing out, well, meaning you saw none. Oh, no, I assure you, sir, there were none. And Holmes is, I have investigated many. Now he's being the investigative teacher. I have investigated many crimes. I have never yet seen one which was committed by a flying creature.
Yeah, what did he fly, Hopkins? What do you think?
He's like, something was there that, there were some object. Oh, then he says, well, can you tell us about I understand, however, from the inquest that there were some objects which you failed to overlook. Um, his sarcasm is fun here. We don't, that often doesn't get pointed out with Holmes. This is, humorous sarcasm that
Oh, wait, but he's snarky all over the place, even to
Yeah.
Watson.
he
You
is.
know,
Yes.
while
He,
not luminous, while not luminous yourself, you're conductor of light. In the Hound, for example. Just that cruel. That's his
Right.
friend. I mean, oh my God.
Here's where we'll get the mention of the rum and the Tantalus. He says there was a Tantalus containing brandy and whiskey, and
Which is the second dog that did nothing.
yes. Well, first there's a bottle of rum and two dirty glasses. Then Holmes says, anything, any other spirit? And he says, yes, a Tantalus containing brandy and whiskey. And so before I get to asking you what you were going to say about that, Glenn, the Tantalus, in case someone is reading these stories for the first time and doesn't really recognize what that is, this is a Tantalus. And these could operate in different ways. In this one, you see, because this bar is up the top here, you can't pull the bottles out without there's a lock here releasing this mechanism, and then you can pull the bottle out. Sometimes they're locked on top, and then this is the part that opens. This particular one, this is the way it opens. It is there to prevent your, servants usually from raiding your liquor
In this
cabinet.
case, it's not servants. He's just a paranoid guy.
Yes. No one. And what's fascinating is because no one's allowed in this room anyway. So he
Yeah, but
doesn't.
gentlemen, he's not entertaining people in his cabin.
Right.
He's a drinker of rum. What does he have? Whiskey and brandy in there in any form,
I
Tantalus
agree.
or otherwise.
This makes no sense.
I am very
Yeah.
troubled by the appearance of this
Could this have
object
been a
in
gift
his
or
cabin.
something?
It could have been a gift. But here's the other thing is maybe, and let me tell you, this is from personal experience, not myself personally, because I have no problem. But for others, people will flush things down the toilet, throw it away, and then you go out and get it again. Or you do this against your own willpower, is that you'll lock it, throw
And
the
he was
key out.
doing that to like it was his way in his sober
Right.
moments, like I'm gonna stop drinking.
When I was trying to quit dipping tobacco, and I think you and I talked about this, Ed, I would throw the can away in the garbage can so that it would be taken away. And then I would go out drinking. And of course, when you drink, you gotta do the thing that you always do when you're drinking, which is smoking a pipe or dipping tobacco. So I'd go out and I'd buy another tin. So I'm thinking what happened is he's trying to keep himself from drinking. And so he's got a key to a Tantalus. And maybe he threw it away in the field. And so what did he do? He went out and got some rum.
But anyway, I'm troubled by it. There's
Yeah.
nothing.
It's
Doesn't seem to
incongruous.
fit.
There's nothing. It just seems incongruous. It seems out of place. Seems out of character.
Yeah.
And
And they're expensive. This is
yeah,
a piece of equipment that you need to know that you're going to use.
Maybe it was left over from his ship. Maybe he had it on the unicorn because that was his way of preventing other people from getting at the booze in the ship's cabin. And so now he's just had it from then.
Well, or maybe he stole it from someone else who may have had it in their ship.
Because that is a place he would have wanted to prevent people from stealing his booze, would be on the ship. And could have been left over from that. If people don't understand why it's still called a Tantalus, that it tantalizes you, it is because you cannot access it. It is named for the Greek mythological figure Tantalus, who was punished, but the stories vary about why he was punished. But he was punished by the gods and made to stand in a pool of water, and above him, just out of reach, were branches laden with delicious fruit, and he couldn't quite get to. So and that's where we get the word Tantalus from this.
Well, he couldn't reach,
from
the tree would recede, right? He would reach up and the tree would recede, so he couldn't grab anything to eat, and he was always hungry. And then when he'd get thirsty, the water that he was standing in would recede away from his feet, and he couldn't move. So yeah, I mean, it's very similar to.
That's where we get the word tantalize from this figure, and so that is a Tantalus. We have no idea why he would have it. He certainly doesn't seem to need a Tantalus, and I would think that, like, even if he didn't have the key, he would just have broken that open and pulled out whatever he wanted.
and it's a mere coincidence that the bottles are completely full.
Yeah, and this Holmes
just very
finds significant, and this is the significant part, that there was a Tantalus undrunk, and that's significant. And the tobacco pouch, he asks, and Hopkins says there was a PC on the flap and a half half an ounce of strong ship's tobacco. I'll get to the ships in a second. But the fact that there was tobacco there, and then but he didn't really smoke much. Why would he even have tobacco? Hopkins is convinced, though, it must be his because it has the initials PC on it, Peter Carey.
Well, and also it was a sealskin pouch, so
Yeah, sealskin makes sense.
Makes sense.
Sealskin was very common in sailing because it would keep your tobacco dry. It was a waterproof.
No, but
Yeah.
it's a
Keep it
kind of
moist.
if Peter
Protected from the water. Yes.
had one, they would have been likely to have been almost certain to be in sealskin. So it all makes sense.
Ship's tobacco. We addressed this in, was it Study in Scarlet when Watson mentions that I smoke ships myself. Um, it's not a brand, even though later when I think is it Adrian publishes a story, he capitalizes it as ship's tobacco as if it's a brand. It's not a brand, but it's a kind of tobacco. And
It has now been sold as a brand.
yes, to the general public, it was ship's tobacco is a tobacco you buy. It's sold in either blocks or it's sold in ropes, and you'd have to break it up. And sailors used to get it. Sailors used to get actually leaves of tobacco. And I was so pleased in Deadly Harpoon when I came across this passage that I had already looked up and found in this magazine, and I was so like, oh my gosh, I found this because I have the power of Google. Like it's not like it took me any great research to do this, but I found this passage in an old magazine, which is then quoted in here, which in Deadly Harpoon, which I was pleased to see. But this is it was an article in a magazine called name I've not included in my notes. It's not the Strand. And it is, oh, it's up here. It's in my title of this. The Harmsworth Monthly Pictorial Magazine. And this was a story on the home life on board a man of war. And look at this. Up here is the bugle call summoning the cooks to get the men's grog for the day. And it's the tune is Jenny something.
Never gonna give
Nancy Dawson. Nancy Dawson is the tune.
Let you down.
In this article, they describe the whole account of how the British Navy prepared their ship's tobacco. Because they don't get their tobacco as you buy it now, as I buy it now for my pipe, already chopped up and already ready to go. They literally get it as leaves of tobacco, and they would have to prepare it. And to do that, they'd put a little water on it or rum. And this is the way to flavor it, but it also to give it some moisture because you don't want it to be too dry. And then they would brunch it up and they would bind it with twine and they would stretch it out and they would make ropes out of it and then they would cut those off and it would keep, and it's kind of curing it is what they would do. Pressure.
They're making tobacco jerky is what you're saying.
Yeah, they were making it like with pressure and with a little moisture, it would stay moist for the whole month that they needed it, next to smoke. You don't want moisture from the sea in it. You want the moisture that you put in it so it doesn't get too dry because it was
you don't want salt water.
Too dry,
that changes
out
the
right
experience.
away. Yeah. So what they don't want is it to dry out, but you also want some you don't want the moisture from the sea air to really affect it. So you compress it into these things.
Ed, I challenge you.
It's strong and it's coarse and it's not actually their ship's tobacco was like their rum. They got the cheapest, worst tobacco and they had to treat it in order to smoke it so it was palatable.
There used to be bricks too that you could cut off a chunk of, right? And then kind of like grind it up.
I still got, you can buy it that way too. You buy it in little blocks and I get those sometimes. And that's one way to do it. All
they
right.
They didn't include the twine in what they were smoking, right? That was just to bind it and then they removed the twine when it was dry or
Do you
dry
care? Did they care? No, they would take the twine off clearly, but would it matter if they smoked a little twine? Probably wouldn't.
Can I also, I was just, I knew it was on manuscript page 16. I think we're close. Um, there is a typo that Doyle makes, and I just wanted to point this out to embarrass his ghost because I know he's watching. Um, Excellent, Watson. The alternative develops. Um, and Doyle spells develops with an E. Devel, and this is page 36, Glenn, of your book. Developes. And I just wanted to say how good I feel about myself that he included a typo in the manuscript and it was corrected in every single edition later. You know, Phil points out that the E is removed, etc., etc., that we are going to this level that there is access now to the manuscript to see Doyle make a mistake because this guy is not infallible. And I know it's a little thing, but without the manuscript, we wouldn't have seen this. You know, that this guy who, again, parthenogenically writes these amazing stories, every once in a while there's a little error. So even you can write great mysteries, is all I'm saying. Is if he can make one mistake, then we all can do this.
I've just discovered in the chat that the Nancy Dawson tune is also Here We Go Round the Mulberry Bush. That's actually the same tune. So that's what they Here We Go Round the Mulberry Bush is what they heard when it was time for grog.
Very interesting.
All right. We're gonna try to make this. We don't want a 3 hour show. We're gonna go shoot for 2.5 hours, is what we're gonna shoot for. The uh there was another issue. There was another thing Hopkins found, and that's the drab colored covered notebook. Um, and it has initials in it, JHN, and dates, and it seems to be a list of stock exchange securities. One of them is CPR. Holmes right away says that's Canadian Pacific Railway, which of course he'd know. Doyle himself invested in Canadian Railway stocks. So that was something that he knew right off the bat. And
One of Doyle's few good investments.
Yeah. Not known for making great investments. So, luckily, though, he always had, well, I'll write some more Sherlock Holmes stories, and then he was flush. So, um, they,
In 1914, too, one of his North American tours was it wasn't the Canadian Pacific, it was the Grand Trunk Pacific Railway from Montreal to Jasper National Park. Um, and so one of his great adventure tales in the Americas is riding the rails in Canada. And I just think that's amazing at that time, 1914, when it was still pretty much a frontier. So,
His travels in general, a
mhm.
lot of them were remarkable. I mean, going to
Mhm.
Egypt,
Mhm.
South Africa, Egypt. Yeah.
and South Africa in the
Hmm.
19th century.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, he
Switzerland.
volunteered, right? He volunteered as a surgeon
No,
in
no,
the
of
war.
course, but
And
God bless him, of course. But
yeah,
nevertheless,
I'm
pretty
just saying
amazing.
that's different than people who went to South Africa because they didn't get a choice. Like he said,
Yeah.
men, I'm with you. And gosh, it's Teddy Roosevelt is the only one that strikes me as anyone, close in my mind to this, like just an adventurer. Maybe Hemingway now, like, I mean, who else?
Canadian Pacific Railway, and also in this notebook is initials JHN. Now, of course, Hopkins thinks that the murderer must have dropped this. This is his notebook. But this is fascinating because this is something that was not mentioned in the inquest. So Holmes didn't know anything about this notebook. And it says Sherlock Holmes' face showed that he was thoroughly taken aback by this new development. This, because we know how Holmes solves crimes. He reads the account or hears the story, and then he pictures like this is what happened, and then he comes up with theories in his head, like these are the stories that I'm creating, that this is how it happened, and this is something that he hadn't factored in, and now he's going to have to kind of rework his narrative to figure out why it's there, because Holmes, because he's already been on the case as Captain Basil attracting sailors, already thinks it's a sailor And now this is a new development that he has to figure out how this fits into,
Well,
who.
to give Holmes a little bit of a break here. He's in his
Yeah,
own words, it's a capital crime to theorize before you have all the facts.
yeah,
In this case, he was missing and didn't know he was missing a fact.
yeah.
So
But
he
how
didn't
do you
know.
ever, I mean, yes, Glenn, you're right. He's got a platitude for everything, but at the same time, you mentioned it before, he's flying by the seat of his pants.
Yeah,
And I think this one in particular is one of those stories where you actually get the procedure. You get like they sit down and do a crime scene analysis for 2 hours in this, right?
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And so this is
But
why
it
Silver Blaze is the
is
analogy is that he's on his stomach in Cornwall or the Wessex where he's just in the mud.
or the second stain. He's crawling
Second,
around and
Yeah.
pulling back the
exactly.
rug and sewing his belly down on the floor.
Yeah,
I
But
think,
I said, look, giving him a little
yeah,
leeway here. He,
you're
he's
right,
missing an important fact through no fault of his own.
right?
I think this is why Holmes goes to look at the crime scene, because I don't think he thinks that, like, I think he already thinks I'm on the path to solving this already. But now when he finds out this thing, now he's like, oh, well, maybe there's something here I need to go and check out and figure out how this all connects. And
Mhm.
then he says, um, I suppose I shall have to come out and have a look at it. Stanley Hopkins gave a cry of joy.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Well, I think also I think no direct evidence. I think it finally dawned on Holmes that the forensic investigation that Hopkins had done and related to Holmes was inadequate.
Yeah,
I mean, it just finally clicked.
yeah,
at the very least incomplete.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
inadequate. Inadequate. Just
yeah, this is the other thing is this is Holmes falling for one of the oldest tricks in all of these stories, right? Is the red herring, like that he's being led down a garden path, right? And he's come to his conclusion. He's already investigating the harpoon. He's inviting sailors to his house, which I mean, that's desperation. But he's now in the position that the reader is, right? There's stuff we don't know. And so he's like, we're in the sidecar, and Holmes is driving the motorcycle, and we're headed to wherever we're going, but like we're along for the ride. This is an interesting point about this story in particular, is that usually Holmes is 10 steps ahead, right?
Mhm.
He already knows the solution. He already knows who done it. But now, mm-mm,
They head off to
Milne.
Forest Row,
Forest Row.
in the Weald. This is especially for Americans. This is south of London. Um,
Surrey.
it's an
Mhm.
area that there was a lot of industry there, and now it's this kind of, or at least in this time, it's this kind of bucolic green landscape, but lots of forest. And there was also another forest there that related to literature. And Max knows this. What would that have been, Glenn?
I don't know.
The Thousand Acre Wood, right? This is
That's the
where
Milne connection, right?
A. Milne,
Oh,
Christopher
right.
Robin. Yeah.
The Thousand
This
Acre
is,
Wood AML. And the reason thank you.
yeah, please.
Besides that geographic connection, what I was also thinking, Milne wrote two, I think, essays about detective fiction and Watson and so forth. And in particular, the previous discussion sort of reminded me, I think it's in How Watson Learned the Trick. It's in one of the two, where he says, the writer of detective stories has an unfair advantage. He can make the deductions be the truth.
Hmm.
And or be the correct result. And he goes on at some length, for example, in the from the Sign of Four, where Holmes deduces that Watson had been at a Turkish bath because his shoes were so nicely laced up and in a very fancy way that Watson wouldn't have done himself. And Milne goes, "Oh, sure, maybe he was out earlier, and he bought a second pair of boots, or he bought a pair of
The
slippers,
bootmaker,
and
right?
the boot
But it would have
and the
had the
boot
tag.
and the bootmaker, retied his shoes when he walked out with his new pair." And he goes on at length about the unfair advantage that the writer
Hmm.
of detective stories has in
over the
ensuring
audience.
ensuring that the deductions are correct.
Yes.
That's
I would also point
fascinating.
out that I was completely wrong. I multiplied the 1,000-acre
You
wood
kept saying
too many times. It's
1,000,
100-acre.
100 acre wood. Yeah, I didn't
I
correct.
heard, I
It's the Glen Miranker wood, I believe.
The
there you go.
but that's fascinating that you had a different Milne connection that I didn't know that you were going to talk about. I thought the Milne connection would have been that this is the area where Milne actually based on the 100 acre wood because he lived near
Yeah.
there. Did a
Well,
lot
and
Well,
of-
no,
Christopher
that was
Robin, Winnie the
I don't
no.
Pooh.
know those essays. I have to look those up. I don't know. Milne wrote.
Yeah, there who wrote a gazillion essays. One is in if I may, and the other one is in the book by way of introduction. PDFs online, no trouble.
I wonder
You'll
if
have
we
no
have it with
trouble
the
finding
Rosenbach.
them.
We have his his Pooh books and his other poetry books in the collection at the Rosenbach. I don't. But I wonder if we have those as well. I'll have to take a look.
So there's actually on
The PDFs are online if
Yeah.
you know if you're in a rush to find them. And
Google Maps too. You can search for Pooh Stick Bridge, and that'll tell you right
Yeah.
about where Peter Carey lived.
Yeah. There's a
Um,
bridge there that people think is the bridge, or at least it is now. I would love to visit there one day and play
yeah.
Pooh Sticks.
The Sherlock and Co. leans heavily into this, and it's not my favorite episode, but they go
I
down
didn't
that
know that. There you go.
Pooh hole. Ooh, rabbit hole. Sorry, phrasing. Um,
Uh,
so the
in how Watson learned the trick, I may be mixing up the
Mhm.
which things occurred in which of his essays, but he comes to Watson's defense in Watson's voice. You write the article is written as if Watson is writing it and says, I was really working very hard to build up the magic of Holmes's skills and so on and so forth. Of course, it's very eloquent and it's Milne writing, but I was not the passive dummy guy, and Holmes had all these lucky breaks and so on and so forth. It's an amusing. It's anyway. They're
that's fun.
they're both short. They're both amusing.
I would
I
also
think.
recommend his Red House Mystery. It's a
Oh,
great
yeah, mysteries are
pastiche. It's
great.
not
Oh,
officially a
in
pastiche.
one of the forwards, he
It's
writes
really
about
good.
how he really had a passion to write a
Yeah.
mystery story,
Right.
and and according to Mill, he had a
It's
discussion,
good.
and he had a discussion with his editor, and his editor said, "Are you kidding?
Yeah.
Everybody expects humor from you, not detective stories. You can't be doing this." Anyway, he wrote the Red House Mystery
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
Which
and
is
it's
very popular. Made into a
and it's pretty good,
movie. Yeah, really good.
and it's quite good,
Yeah.
I think.
I have
I
a
And it
agree.
nice
was
map
Well,
back. I have a nice map back paperback of it over
ooh,
here.
it
I
So
was
read
over
it to
the
my
he
I
wrote
read it
it
to my
over
daughter
the
when she was 7, and she loved it.
yeah.
Like,
he wrote it over the objections of his publisher or his agent or whatever, who said,
right.
"No,
Good.
you're a mystery writer. Excuse me, you're a humor
Yeah,
writer,
kids or
not a mystery
kids.
writer. Come on."
Let's get to this red room that Holmes goes investigate. He goes to the murder scene and they find out that somebody has tried to break in the window and the door. And
Right.
so now they're going to
There's scratches on the lock.
yeah. So now
Right.
they're going to have a stakeout at night to see if he returns, because
I
of course
love
he's going to
this.
return if he couldn't get in.
Yeah,
And
this is detection at its finest. The only one I can think of that's maybe comparable is the stakeout in the Red-Headed League, right?
this stakeout, though, is really a joke winds up being made in that Watson describing the long, melancholy vigil, the thrill which the hunter feels when he lies beside the water pool and waits for the coming of the thirsty beast of prey. This, hard and flashing fang and claw that's going to, and it's Nelligan.
The
They
little guy.
As I said, the gothic novel in his soul,
Yeah.
gothic story in his soul, peering out,
And he makes a joke about
poking out.
it that that the guy that they catch is young, frail, thin, wearing a Norfolk jacket, and knickerbockers.
Norfolk jacket is one of those things that, a lot of Sherlockians, they go for the Inverness, right? Norfolk jacket is the belted thing. Yeah, I think of Prince Charles in the countryside, like the tweed and the belt, right?
There you go. I'm ready for it. There's a Norfolk
Excellent.
jacket.
right,
front,
and the belt.
Yeah.
I think of Peter Wimsey, Lord Peter
back.
Wimsey.
Beautiful. Look at this.
Yeah.
Look who we're one in
There we
Sherlock
go.
Holmes in
Dun, dun, dun,
Washington.
dun. Well
There's
done, you.
Basil
Oh, I
in
love that
Norfolk
haircut.
jacket. Yeah. The ever-changing hair for the first, what, 5 or 6 films, and hair changed every one. And then,
The third through the ninth, he was
yeah,
trying to make sure that you knew that he wasn't the Sherlock Holmes that he was playing in the first two, The
yeah.
Adventures and Hound.
So
But yeah,
here he is in Sherlock Holmes in Washington fighting Nazis, and he wearing the Norfolk jacket,
Hey,
Basil.
Max, I always thought that the reason was that after the first two, the rest were Universal B pictures and they couldn't afford a hairstylist.
and he did it himself.
I
Maybe.
don't know. I got out of the
Oh, they
shower.
were just then it was just
You
a
know what?
rug, then it was just a
Did this or something.
toupee because he was
All
bald.
three of
He was
us,
bald. He was
all
completely
three of
bald.
us could totally pull that off,
Yeah.
right? It
There you
just
go.
take us a year or two.
It's the who, like, which toupee am I wearing? And the first couple, they had a couple there where they were giving him all these weird toupees that didn't make
Yeah.
any sense.
I think
I
that
think
they're
it was his real hair.
I
No.
think it's a consequence of the budgets.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Well, can I also say that it wasn't just a stakeout, it was an ambuscade.
Ooh, an ambuscade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And that Holmes and Watson went to walk in these beautiful woods, a few hours to the birds and the flowers. This is one of those points, though, that like dovetails again with the birds and the flowers into the speech about the rose, where, you know, we emphasize that, Holmes is this thinking machine, but in these very small vignettes, he's got the art in his blood. He's got this amateur, and I don't know if it was you, Ed, or maybe it was Brad Kefauver who said, the amateur nature or the consulting detective is the art for art's sake. He's doing it because he enjoys it. He's doing it for the challenge. And this is another one of those where he's even more invested because there's something that he doesn't understand. There's
Yeah.
something he doesn't know. And
Yeah.
a challenge for Sherlock Holmes is mana, right? It's his not kryptonite, but it's the thing that really gets him going. Because how many times have we seen Holmes confused, challenged, beaten, a handful, right? And those are the stories we remember.
Yeah, it wasn't me that said that, but
Sorry, yeah, it was Brad. It
probably
was Brad, I'm
Brad, and
pretty
that
sure.
that makes, but I completely agree with that. Um, Even when they catch John Hope Nelligan, this was the illustration that led off the issue, and there he is. He's wearing that Norfolk jacket. Paget got it right. This is the Norfolk jacket here. You can see the half belt here on it, and that's the jacket, and of course it's knickerbockers because it's also a golfing costume, and he has this is a well-known custom for golfers, and especially to pair it with the knee length knickerbocker pants here, that he has gone to this hotel to pretend that he's golfing.
And the two harpoons on the wall.
There's the harpoon heads here. You can see that have this extra these barbs coming down here. Yeah,
I think inaccurately. And again, this is Peter Blau's theory, not mine. But I think there would have been different types of harpoons that would have been available. Again, a la
yeah.
the harpoon, the flesher, the
Well, here's the empty space.
yep. There's
This is the
two on the
one that
wall.
perhaps that one that hit him, and that was perhaps more of a lance
Right.
that was used then.
Right.
So, all righty. John Hopley Nelligan is who they've caught. They're not quite the thirsty beast of prey, the fierce tiger,
What a name.
flashing fang and claw. It's just John Hopley Nelligan. Um, he then tells his story, another story. We get another character telling a story, and this one is about his father and the failed bank. He left the securities. He left with the securities so he could redeem them. He could come. We don't know. Like, none of this part of the story makes any. I thought it was me.
Does it have to?
There was an essay in here on financial securities because I was like, well, why did he leave with the securities? Why didn't he?
Ponzi scheme. It's called a Ponzi scheme. He's going to
I
sell somebody else the same securities, pay off the original investors.
that there were stock certificates that could either be sold or cash for money, and then so when Carey gets a hold of them, that's what he does. But they
Well, why not simply return them to the creditors?
right. Like none of this,
The whole
like,
thing, no, it doesn't make any
and
sense.
it also means that his father was a bad guy. He was leaving with the securities. And he said that I'm going to come back. Like, what was he, where was he going? That he could change what had happened. And why would he take the securities with him? Um, so even
Oh, this
Black,
brings up
even
this.
Black Peter, even Peter Carey could master this system of defrauding people out of this. Like none of this seems to.
So the last line of the story, Holmes and Watson are leaving for Norway. Okay. And I think you have to
Big jump into the end, dude. We don't need to, but
I know, I know. Well, we only got like 3 more minutes, Ed. But
3-ish.
I'm just saying, I think that Holmes and Watson agree with you. That in particular, Holmes is saying, I'm going to Norway because there's something that doesn't smell quite right about that story. Um,
I
so
think yes.
I think this is, and this is
Oh,
from Rebecca
Max,
Ray. She
I
said,
cert I certainly agree with you, but I interpreted it to be something where the disposition of Nelligan, not the securities, was what he was taking him to Norway.
What do you, well, all right. Well, I'm going to ask you that in a second when we get to the very end then, because Nelligan is also lying here and he's caught out because he says, I was
Yes,
never here. I'm just showing up now. Clearly he was there at the murder because he dropped his notebook and they've caught him.
absolutely. Yes, yeah.
Hopkins, Hopkins now has his culprit. This is it. Initials, you were here at the murder. And honestly, this is real police work. This is what they do. Clearly, you were here at the murder
but
and you had
how
a
do you put
reason to kill
initials?
this guy.
How do
Why
you put
wasn't it
initials
you?
on a sealskin bag?
Why
It's got
wasn't it you?
fur.
Yeah. And he had a motive. Why wouldn't it have been him? So Holmes says, okay, um, Hopkins puts Holmes and Watson up in the Bramble Tie Hotel in Forest Row, which is a real hotel. And
Of course it is, Ed. These stories are
yeah,
factual.
yes. And here it is, and it's still there.
That's
Um,
beautiful.
it's been sold and reopened, and they used to have a Black Peter bar in this place. Well, they of course had it after the story. It was at some point it was established. This hotel did exist, and it was called the Brambletie or Brambletie before the story. And I did find confirmation of that it existed before then. It was a place where you would stay and go and golf in the area. Uh, they had now the bar is called the Bram, short for Brambletie. But it used to be Black Peter's Bar and Restaurant, right
Well,
there.
it's too bad that it's not. That'd
Yeah.
be
So, but now it is the Bram, and it has changed owners, and that is. But you can visit there now. That's where they stay. That's the only connection we have with that. Um,
that's neat.
Does the
whole
bar offer a rum drink called the
Only
Black?
rum. Only rum.
I was hoping to, like, even when it was Black Peter's, to find some cool pictures. Maybe it was no, I think it was just like a regular bar. They
Yeah.
just called it that.
It's
It's a
neat though
shame
that
they
they
didn't
are
have a
acknowledging the
nautical
connection.
themed bar. They could
Yeah.
have harpoons on the wall and really gone all in, but I don't know. So maybe they did. I couldn't find any pictures of it that way. Um, Holmes is disappointed in Hopkins, and then he says to Watson, one should always look for a possible alternative and provide against it. It is the first rule of criminal investigation. That's a nice line, I think, that doesn't get bandied about a lot in the famous lines of Sherlock in investigating. One should always look for a possible alternative and provide against it. And that's what he kind of does here. Or maybe what I'm trying to say is that's what he's learned to do here because he didn't know there was a possible alternative until the notebook showed up. And then he went to the shed, and then they called Nelligan, and he realized that, like, I think this is almost him learning, like, I didn't provide for that possible alternative earlier. Now I
Yeah.
need that's something that he recognizes now.
I don't think it's new to him, but I think it's part of his process. Like again, like this is Sherlock Holmes, CSI, Woodman's Lee. that we're learning how to do an investigation, and this is unique in several stories. There are elements of this, but in Black Peter we get more of it than usual.
He heads back to Baker Street, and now he's placing ads. He places an ad from Captain Basil. Who I was hoping Max was going to show up. Well, he did. He had the hat on
A
earlier.
bit.
There you go. As Captain Basil, who Watson said was being acquired uh, for earlier in the story. And so, and again, this is confirmation that Doyle or that Holmes was already investigating ahead of time. And he already knew it was a harpooner. And so he's investigated for. We get a little breakfast in Baker Street, and then they talk about is it Hopkins? Yeah, Hopkins comes and they talk about the case. So now I've got to run to that part of the story.
What's interesting to me too is that Hopkins brings the notebook with him, and Holmes is doing some like minute investigation. There's a Paget drawing, I believe, about like Hopkins and Holmes and Watson are standing over his shoulder, looking down while Holmes is like minutely turning through the pages of this notebook. This is earlier in the story, but it's one of those things we rarely see, and there's very little that happens that like defines anything about Baker Street. Yeah, there you go. Exactly. And that we don't see a lot of Baker Street in this story. We don't see a whole Mrs. Hudson is mentioned, but she doesn't have any dialogue. There's eggs, and coffee, but there's no bearskin rug, there's no seats, there's no fire, there's no nothing. It's just,
Yeah.
this is all about plot. Like this is a straightforward mystery here. It's not a whole lot of cozy.
Holmes wasn't entirely pleased with or Doyle wasn't entirely pleased with the illustrations for this one. And I don't know. Did I learn this from Deadly Harpoon, or did I learn it somewhere else? Maybe that that he wished that the murder had happened, or somebody just said that they wished that like they had shown the murder. Like that would have been a great illustration of him pinned to the wall.
Mm. There were illustrations of the murder, but not in Sidney Paget.
Not in Collier's and not in Strand.
Sure.
But the I I find the Strand I find the Paget illustrations for this, not as compelling as usual.
Can I tell you something that scarred my daughter for life? Um, and so at the time, 5 or 6 year old daughter and I were playing the Frogwares game, the Crimes and Punishments, Sherlock Holmes Crimes and Punishments, and you can actually play the Adventure of Black Peter. I promise this won't be a half-hour tangent. It'll only be a quarter hour at best. But in one of the scenes, you have to
Sorry,
actually.
Glenn, did you know it was going to go this long? Sorry. Go ahead.
We may have
Okay.
to have an
The only problem
intermission.
I'm having is my coffee cup ran out.
We gotta wrap this up then. But no, so Crimes
I
and
still have
Punishment,
more rum. I got a whole bottle to finish.
there's two scenes that are a little bit gruesome. One is you actually have to learn how to stick a pig with a harpoon. Like that's a mini game in the Frogwares, which is a Ukrainian developed Sherlock Holmes game. I think it's probably the best Sherlock Holmes like video game out there, period. And the second is you can go into the cabin, what I like to call the sea shanty, um, of Peter Carey, and you see him pinioned to the wall with a harpoon through his chest. And it is gruesome. There's blood everywhere. By the time Holmes gets there, I think the body has been removed. So you didn't even see that in the
Yeah.
original. And I'd say the one thing that it falls short on is it does what everybody in and his mother does in Pastiche Land is they put Lestrade into it when Hopkins really should have been there. So.
And it scares your children.
Oh, she still says, I don't want to play that game anymore, Dad. And I said, I don't play it either. It's fine. I just wanted to see it. And I thought she'd be interested in hearing, no, don't scar your children like I did.
All righty. Thank you for telling that. I'm glad I didn't show that to my kids. They have their own issues, the things that I tried to show them. I thought they were old enough. They Nelligan shows up, and Holmes lets him know that it couldn't have been Nelligan. He couldn't have thrown the harpoon through him and pinned him to the wall. I couldn't even do it, you know.
Right.
So so it couldn't have been Nelligan. And
So
then
Holmes was right all along.
he also points out the rum. Why would they have been drinking rum when the
Mhm.
Tantalus was there? So it must have been a sailor that Nelligan that you know
It's all coming together.
and then the initials that he's preparing him for. They have the sailor show up and they give their story, and the third sailor is Peter Cairns, PC. Holmes knows. Clearly, I have you. You are a harpooner with the initials PC.
And he's a huge guy.
And that's what he needed. Holmes in the beginning, like, I need a harpooner and his initials need a PC. There you go. He's got him. And like the securities issue is just what brought it on. But Holmes knew that that was the criminal he needed to find. What he didn't know was what inspired it, which is the story that Cairns will tell him now.
Right.
Um, that it
And it
yeah.
all combines to form the entire ecosystem of this story.
And
But what a coinky dink that Peter Cairns and John Hopely Nelligan happened to come into contact in the exact same night. So either that's something we haven't explored, or again,
Well,
coinky
you know,
dinks again.
Nelligan's on his trail and he finally tracks him down, and it just happens, you know, that's the night. Yes, it's a coincidence, but it's like it's two people were searching for him,
Yeah.
and the odds that they would both arrive the same night is not usual, but it's not impossible in the fact that both of these guys were searching for him at this particular.
Yep. True. It's not impossible. It's just a very improbable
Um,
event.
Carey
But
had put out,
if it's merely improbable, it must be the truth.
there you go. And he didn't murder him. He says, he says, you say I murdered Peter Carey. I say I killed Peter Carey because of course it was self-defense, because he says Carey pulled out his knife, so he just grabbed the harpoon and impaled him to the wall. That might be overkill. But I get it. I wonder what the like I wonder if he's going to be, you know, like, and he was doing it for nefarious reasons, that he was trying to steal the
He
thing,
was,
the
he was trying to
security
get his
from
cut. He
him.
was want to try to get his cut of money that neither of them were
He
entitled to.
tells the story. He saw Peter Carey push Nelligan overboard, Nelligan Senior overboard, and take the
Black Peter
security.
mailing is what it's
Yes.
called.
So he murdered him, but he murdered him in self-defense. He was just trying to get, you know, some money from him. I guess he was trying to blackmail him.
No, no, he did murder him in self-defense because of the folding knife, or what was the name
Yeah,
of the
yeah, a clasp knife, which is a
clasp knife
folding knife.
that
Yeah.
Harry was going to kill him because of
Yeah.
the blackmail.
Well, he pulled a knife out and then he shot him with the harpoon.
Hmm.
Like, you could say that is, well, why didn't you just hold the harpoon and leave? You could have done that, but no, instead he like impales him.
Well, he of course also could have whacked him over the head with the harpoon and knocked him out. I mean,
Sure. No, it was a justified homicide according to Cairns, but who knows?
Yes.
I'm gonna have to hop off for a minute for an intermission. I'll be right back.
Intermission. It's all that rum. They Uh, but again, Glenn, we get another story. Another character tells a story, and he tells, you know, the story. It's kind of two-parter of not only the time on the ship when he saw Peter Carey commit the murder, but also now the story of what actually happened in the murder. And I think we can believe it. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't seem as if everything point like he doesn't say anything that seems to protect himself, except that, you know, that he had a knife, but we know the evidence there that the knife was there and it was Peter Carey's knife. We know that as well. um so
well,
uh
Nelligan is almost his appearance is almost superfluous to the tale. The background with his father and so on, absolutely. But John Hopkins Nelligan's appearance in the tale and having to be there is, I think Max correctly called it a red herring. I think
Yeah,
Hitchcock would call it the mulligan.
the mulligan. Yeah, but it also, well, the Notebook was the mulligan, right?
The notebook,
Yeah,
the
'cause it
notebook,
didn't really
the note,
matter
yeah, the
that.
notebook was the
Yeah,
mulligan. Yeah. Not the character himself, but the notebook wouldn't have been there if Nelligan hadn't shown up.
yeah.
Drop it.
But
But
it does provide the motive, and the motive was that it was the record of the securities, and that's why he was after Peter Carey. So, um, Holmes now finishes up. He lights his pipe and then gives the lighting his pipe. Then he like gives the reason why he was able to figure all of this out, right? How he solved it. That the PC, he knew that the PC must have been another person, not Peter Carey, even though the initials were the same, because Black Peter didn't smoke the rum and was drunk instead of whiskey or brandy, so it must be a sailor. He found out the names of the crew on the Sea Unicorn. One of those guys had the initials PC, so he put out the ad for them. And this is the full confirmation here now that he was working on this case from the start. I think if you read the story for the very first time, you might not catch it until the very end that like he's been working on this case from the very start. It wasn't just harpooning the pig. He was already figuring out, that it was a sailor and I need to find a harpooner and get in touch with this, sailing crowd to solve this.
The
Um,
tobacco closes the loop. I
yeah,
mean, both figuratively where Holmes is smoking his pipe, right? But also literally in that the first clue that we have is the tobacco pouch and that he doesn't have a pipe and Holmes already knows the end
well, but
right
gents,
here.
there's um another observation. Other than it's a very colorful case, what would have turned Holmes on to what would have made Holmes even begin to look at it? Nobody asked him in until
yeah.
nobody asked him in until Hopkins shows up.
He just read it in the
So,
paper and thought this is
like I
interesting.
said, other than it was a
Yeah,
very colorful case,
yeah,
which maybe that may be the whole reason.
This is another reason that I think it really is an analogy or another version of Silver Blaze is that Holmes has been tracking this case from afar. This
yeah.
is this is how Holmes
But
does
he,
it.
but he, but he didn't, but he didn't really dig into the case. He
No.
shows that he knew
Yeah.
of it because of the accounts in the paper.
hmm That's
Really
it.
get
That's what I'm saying is that
no,
it's
but he didn't get involved
correct.
until he was called into the case. He is involved. He's investigating. He's doing experiments. He's doing stuff for no apparent reason other than it was in the papers and kind of curious.
Yes,
That
because
maybe
look at Silver Blaze. He regrets not injecting himself into Silver Blaze, right? Because he says, I should have been there. I should have been there a week ago, right? Why didn't they call me in earlier? Because I could have been here and solved it, right? And so now he's doing the same thing, except he's already involving himself into it. And so that's why again, this is the first time I've noticed they've so closely tied together, but I see echoes of the one and the other.
Yeah. Glenn, we were correct. We actually said Mulligan when we meant MacGuffin, James. Thank
did
you,
I
James.
say no, MacGuffin is what
And
I
I
meant.
said I said the same thing too, Mulligan. Well,
I'm
the golf thing led me to Mulligan, so there we go.
You guys can have a do-over on the MacGuffin.
okay. Thank you. Very kind of you.
The end of the story. Holmes, he's telling Hopkins, release Nelligan, give him the securities, and uh, then if you want me for the trial, my address was here. Watson and I will be off in Norway. I'll send particulars later. We'll get to the
And
Norway
this,
in a second, but first,
yeah.
Nelligan. Why does he get like so he'll then give them to the people? I guess that's trusting, right?
And the securities which Peter Carey has sold are lost
They're
forever.
lost forever. Yes.
And yet, where is he going? Norway. Why? And this is
I
this is
say,
the
why are
question.
they? I asked earlier, why are they going to Norway?
Yeah, why are
You're
they
not
going
the
to
only
Norway?
one. This is the
They
thing I've been trying to solve this whole time. I think, I looked in Klinger's annotated. There are a couple of theories.
People have theories. Well, let's do the Doyle theory first. And like Doyle as a writer is just throwing this thing there at the end of the story saying that like, oh, Holmes is the kind of person who's like, now I'm going on because there must be some case that wants me there. And it's interesting, especially because I'm being called to another country to
Sure.
be. So there's the one. But
But
with the
that's not what Doyle
story,
or that's not what Holmes says. He's not saying I'm pursuing a case. They're just saying I'm going to Norway, which leads the reader to go, why?
why would you go to Norway? So within the story, then we can construct
hmm
reasons
And
that
remember, and this is what I learned from Klinger, and I love this at Klinger and Baring Gould, is that Norway and Sweden were united under Otto II. They were the king of Norway, Sweden at the time. But still, Holmes says Norway because it's a very specific point that he's going to, and that is where the senior Nelligan might have landed. And that he's not a believer that the senior Nelligan had altruistic intentions.
he started in his little knot yacht for Norway just before the warrant was issued for his arrest. Then he was
Right.
crossing to Norway. So Norway is mentioned earlier in the
Mhm.
story.
Correct. And this is where Peter Carey would have run into him is off the coast of Norway, potentially, or south of there. I don't know if it'd be the English Channel or Northern Atlantic, but somewhere in that region during in the shipping channels, right, where they would have had favorable um, currents as well as winds. But I think what it implies is that he doesn't believe I'm sorry, Patrick Cairns because Cairns is saying, "Look, I didn't murder him. I saved the crown, the prosecution of Peter Carey. I am innocent. This guy's a bad guy." He says, "No, like Holmes and Watson don't believe this. He's actually just trying to save his own skin, and that the elder Nelligan is still out there somewhere."
That he
That's my
wasn't,
theory.
Cairns lied, he wasn't killed, that all Carey did was steal the securities.
Correct.
And now Nelligan is still in Norway
Right.
and his son is trying to get the securities so he and his father can, or, yeah.
That's the only thing I can make of why he would go to Norway at this point.
Glenn,
So
do you have any Norway theories?
With almost no evidence, I think Holmes was not sure that Nelligan had been murdered and that he was abandoned someplace somehow in Norway.
We know he doesn't like loose ends. We know that he loves to tie up every little detail. My favorite example is Sign of Four. Oh, so that's where the rope. You brought the rope at like he brings that up at like everything is done, and he has to know about this one little detail. Oh, you brought the rope. Like Holmes can't stand an unfinished piece of the puzzle. That everything has to fit, and he needs to know.
right, right, that there's more to it than what he's been told. He doesn't believe it. I did look in Scandinavia in Sherlock Holmes. This is one of the great collections of the especially Danish Sherlockians, but Swedish, Norwegian Sherlockians. And I didn't see anything about it, but I may have missed it. This is another BSI press book that international series. So I didn't find an answer, but that's what I'm going to go with is he's still on the trail of the original crime.
Well, Max, Glenn, we're gonna leave it there. Thank you both so much for doing this extended episode of Sherlock Monthly. And it was extended because we took an hour before we got here because we were so interested in hearing about you collecting and doing this stuff, Glenn. So thank you
It's
for
been great.
being here. I really appreciate it. Uh, Thank you for being a steward of these wonderful items, manuscripts, and books of Doyle too, Glenn. I mean, we do that at the Rosenbach as well, and it is so important that these things are preserved and kept for people to continue to see. And you do what we do. You share them with people. You don't hold them where no one can
No,
see them in a
no, no.
collection. You love to share them, and that is absolutely wonderful. And thank you so much for that.
My pleasure.
Coming up next month, everyone, in the next episode, we will return to talk about Charles Augustus Milverton. That will be fun with Monica Schmidt and Rich Kashunas will join me for that. The Worst Man in London. I have my edition. I'll be reading that as well. Thank you to the sponsor of Sherlock Mondays, Lisa Washington. We couldn't do these shows without the generous support of our patrons. You can support the Rosenbach through donation. You can, your support helps us create more programs like this and also care for our collections. You can also become a member of the Rosenbach. Membership gives you early access to courses and programs on when they open for registration. Also discounts to the programs and courses as well. You can find out more at our website, rosenbach.org. Again, let me remind you to subscribe to our channel, to like these videos. Max, Glenn, thank you. Max is back on the beach, ready. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library, where the game is a book. Thank you, everyone, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.